Hello and welcome to One Week, One Year, a podcast where we watch and discuss every year of film history in order, starting in 1895, the dawn of cinema, and this week is 1933. I'm one of your hosts, Chris Ellie. I'm a film projectionist, and joining me as always is...
I'm Glenn Covell. I'm a filmmaker.
He makes films. Yeah, we are back at it again, 1933. Just a quick note for everybody that you can watch this on YouTube or listen on your podcast app of choice. Different little slight bonuses depending on which avenue you go. Maybe there are, I don't know, maybe you should listen to it twice. You really shouldn't. But whatever your preference, thank you for listening. Glenn, how's it going? What's up?
It's going fine, I suppose. I had a nice little Thanksgiving holiday in the Hudson Valley, where I'm from, and where you're from, I suppose.
Yes, that's why we know each other. Proximity.
Very, very true.
Guess I haven't recorded since before the festival, and the Denver Film Festival was one of the craziest, most stressful things I've ever done, but it was cool. There's a lot of fun stuff that happened, and yeah, I did my own kind of Thanksgiving jam, but that was sort of... And we're at the theater. We're returning to playing 35mm film. We played this movie Divinity on 35 a couple days ago, and it looks
nice.
It's really cool. 1933. Let's get into it, Glenn. What happened in the year 1933? Like, what was some of the news items of note?
Well,
the news of the year, 1933. After being claimed as spoils of the Spanish-American War, the U.S. Congress votes to allow independence for the Philippines. The Nazis seize power in Germany after Adolf Hitler is appointed Chancellor. Germany bans all other political parties and trade unions. The Reichstag Parliament building is burned to the ground. The Dachau concentration camp is opened to imprison political dissidents. Unemployment reaches 25%. 1/4 of the United States is out of a job. The Postal Telegraph Company introduces the first singing telegram. The Screen Actors Guild is established in Hollywood. Newly elected President Franklin Roosevelt introduces his New Deal to bring jobs back to America. A monstrous aquatic beast is sighted in the Scottish lake of Loch Ness. The first drive-in movie theater opens. Dust storms sweep across American farmland. The 21st Amendment is ratified. Prohibition is repealed.
and that is the news. And I have a prop this time for that last one. An authentic reproduction newspaper of the repeal of Prohibition.
The Herald Examiner. What a generic newspaper title.
It's Chicago. It's a Chicago paper.
Read it out for the podcast audience.
You can hear the fine ASMR audio of this newspaper.
Do you have your microphone switched to ASMR mode?
No, I don't know if it has one. The headline is Prohibition Era Ended. Loop Crowds Hail Repeal.
Loop?
I didn't read the article, so I'm not sure about these loop crowds, but just the fact that I had that, I felt like I should put it on the camera.
Nice prop. We should be drinking for this one. Although it's really like late, like December when Prohibition ends. So
yeah,
most of 1933, by being immersive, we should stay sober. And also the Nazis. That's a bummer, right?
Huge bummer.
Yeah.
Hot take. Huge bummer.
I actually went to that concentration camp when I visited Germany a few years ago, and it is obviously like the most heavy thing that I have ever done. Basically, it's, like just walking in there like feels awful. Yeah. But let's switch gears a little bit. Let's not talk about the Nazis right now. We don't want to do that. But for now, yeah, let's get into 1 week, one reel. A couple short cartoons to whet our appetites.
I feel like it's kind of funny how all the shorts we've been covering lately have just been cartoons. Like that's sort of where shorts are at now. It's like it's mostly cartoons that are kind of the most notable things to talk about.
That's the sense that I get, is that cartoon shorts, newsreels, and then features. Maybe there are. I think there are some live action shorts, like some short comedies or whatever. But like all of the kind of notable comedy people seem to have moved on to features.
Yeah, but I think maybe we'll do some like Three Stooges pretty soon. I think they're going to start doing shorts in like the mid-30s, so that's fun.
I will say, like, the more cartoons that I watch from the early 30s, the more I want to watch. I saw little pieces of a Disney 33 cartoon recently, and it just looked so fantastic. We're not talking about it this episode, but it's just like, as we kind of traced the evolution of Disney and Fleischer like animation over the course of however many previous years, and watched it get more advanced, I think it is really, really matured at this point, and they're doing really interesting stuff.
Yeah.
Speaking of Fleischer, though, we've got Popeye the Sailor Man, a Betty Boop cartoon.
Just Popeye the Sailor, I think, is the title of the short, right?
Maybe.
But the song is Popeye the Sailor Man. So.
Yes. Popeye the Sailor with Betty Boop.
Yeah. I didn't realize that this is like, I guess Popeye has more screen time, but it's like, this is like a Betty Boop cartoon that like introduces a new character, kind of.
It does, yeah. It does seem like a lot of what has been happening is that Betty Boop is such a like standout star here that like everything has to be like Bimbo got wrapped up into Betty Boop, and so like she can just make a cameo in anything that they want to do that is not related to her.
This is like Betty Boop presents Popeye. Betty Boop no longer a poodle in this one.
Yes, full human flapper. She appears for a second as a hula dancer, a tanned Betty Boop. I guess let's not get into the politics of that. That is a hula dancer in a short segment in this, but it is mostly about Popeye. And he arrives fully fleshed out as the Popeye we know. Like
exactly the classical. All the Popeye stuff is in this first short. Like Popeye immediately came onto the scene with all of his character traits fully formed, and then did not change ever.
Yes, he introduces himself with a like kind of cat style "This Is Who I Am" song.
There you go. Yeah,
I'm Popeye the Sailor Man. And then he kind of gives some details about what his deal is. He hates all palookas and what ain't on the up and square.
Don't we all?
The usage of palooka, and they say it a couple times in this one. They call people palookas, and I quite enjoy it.
Yeah, palooka. He likes eating spinach and punching objects into smaller versions of the same object. Like, picks up a big anchor, punches it into a bunch of small anchors. Picks up a big clock, punches it into a bunch of small clocks. Classic sailor activity.
That is what sailors do.
Yeah.
I my understanding of the world is mostly informed by cartoons, but yes.
Yeah. It is funny that, like, Popeye, what I think of as Popeye's kind of whole deal is, like, eating spinach and fighting.
Right.
And, like, neither of those, are those, like, he's not, it has nothing to do with boats. Like he's not doing, like, sailor things.
That is true. I mean, like, I wonder if there is some kind of association between sailors and spinach, but I don't really
maybe
know.
It's just like a can of spinach, so it's like this the kind of spinach that you'd eat on a boat. That's it, he's not eating fresh spinach.
Right.
He's not cooking spinach up in like into a nice salad. He's just eating it right from a can. I did think this has a lot of kind of classic Fleischer Brothers cartoon stuff though.
Yeah, a lot of fun, like really fun cartoon logic in this. Going across a rope bridge, and the rope bridge gets cut, and then he kind of like it stays rigid as it falls down. It stays rigid on the left side as it falls down from the right side, and so you can run away on the rigid bridge.
Or then he to get across the ravine, he throws a rope across and just pulls the whole mountain so that the ravine closes.
I that's maybe my favorite bit from this.
That was definitely my favorite bit because it got me. Like, I did not expect that to happen, and I definitely guffawed when it did. It's
some classic like cartoon logic, which they have a good amount of in here. Where Popeye's strong and he like hits the bell on the you hit the hammer on the ground and it makes the bell ring. Carnival game thing, and then it flies out in the air and then hits the moon and bounces off the moon.
But then he punches Bluto, the villain, and his Adam's apple on his neck goes up and hits his head, and that makes the same bell sound, which is also a pretty good bit.
And we also have a tying olive oil to the train tracks type situation, although it's a Muscle Guy version where they wrap the train tracks around her.
Which we probably talked about this on the show before. I was trying to find like what is the first instance of like tying a woman to train tracks.
Well, it was vaudeville.
Yeah, but like I couldn't because of all of the like early 1910s shorts and things, and I think we watched a single one that had that in it.
I feel like we did, but I don't remember.
Yeah. Like, I think it's one of those things that people kind of associate with, like, old-timey silent movie stuff, that it's, like, it's not really in there.
There is definitely it's like a trope. It's a tropey thing of old movies. I believe Movie Silently has an article about that specifically.
Yeah.
If I find it, we can link it.
Yeah. I also thought... So, speaking of that carnival game with the hammer and hitting the bell, apparently the reward for that carnival game in Popeye universe is a box of cigars.
Right, and then they do a bit that is done in one of the other movies here, which is you're handed a box of cigars to take one. You take one out and then hand the one back to them and take the entire box, which is done with cigarettes in a movie we'll talk about later.
Oh, I don't know if I even picked up on that.
Yeah, they did that in Gold Diggers of 1933.
Anything else to say about Popeye?
It's a cartoon. It's fun. Watch it.
There's some racist caricature stuff happening in this also, which is a bummer. But it's the 30s. Things were shittier back then.
Yeah, on that, and I think we've touched on this before, that like one of the things that was most astounding to me watching the early movies is how there was relatively few instances of outright racism, and stuff like D.W. Griffith really feels like an outlier at the time.
I think because of him, it became less of an outlier.
Maybe,
It feels like there's definitely been more like not even depictions of racism on screen, of just like movies that are like in their being racist, in their like depictions and their ideals, kind of
right,
since Birth of a Nation, which is also a bummer. But
I would say even especially in the late 20s, early 30s, like the kind of like racial caricature stuff sort of turned up a notch.
Yeah,
unfortunately.
On that note, let's talk about a different movie.
Yeah. The other short that we looked at was A Night on Bald Mountain, which was super cool.
Yeah, super cool. I'd never heard of this movie. I only found out about it because it's listed on Letterboxd. I'd never even heard of this type of animation before, which is also super cool and interesting.
Yeah, pin screen animation is the method that it was animated with, which was basically invented the year prior. This movie took 18 months to finish.
For 9 minutes, approximately.
Which, like, it makes sense. Like, this is so intricate. It's really...
Yeah.
It's really absurd, like, the amount of, new and strange imagery that can be made with this technique.
Yeah, it's really distinctive, but it's also, like... I wasn't really sure how it was done until I looked up a YouTube thing. Or, like, there's a like a short documentary about how it's done that was made in the 60s, I think. But it's with the original co-inventors of this animation, Claire Parker and Alexandre Alexiev. I should really look up how to pronounce things before recording them on a podcast, but
his middle name is Alexandrovich.
His parents just picked one name and just went with that, huh? They were just like, let's just put a bunch of variations on that.
Alex.
Yeah.
And this movie was also directed by the two of them.
Yeah. Claire Parker was an American, like MIT educated engineer, and Alexandre was a Russian filmmaker and illustrator, and they together invented this wacky pin screen animation technique, which is like a board full of tiny black pins that, depending on how many and how far the pins are sticking out of the board, create a black and white image
based on like the amount of light that they're letting through, right?
Yeah, which is like, it's very difficult to describe. This is definitely an instance where the YouTube version is going to come in handy, because we can probably put up some visual aids.
Yeah, the imagery that it produces almost ends up looking like it's printed on like cloth, like a burlap sack or something like that, which is really distinctive. It's got this kind of like grittiness to it that
it's very kind of smoky almost. It has sort of this like lines aren't super clean, and there's a lot of just like variation in light and shadow, kind of like, I mean, I think that the imagery that they make with it kind of uses that to its advantage too. It's a lot of like clouds and smoke and kind of spooky stuff.
But I mean, speaking of the imagery that they make with it, there are like, this really must just be to do with their animation prowess and not with the device itself, because there's some really incredible imagery in this movie, not just in and of itself, but also like in terms of like how it was animated. There are a lot of like very convincing looking like 3D rotations of objects, almost as if you're looking at like a clay figurine, but you're not. Like it kind of produces that effect in a way, but like the way characters move around and shift, and the way that like shadows fall on faces, it's so intricate. It is like no wonder it took so long, because it's incredibly it seems incredibly like labor intensive and artistic, like as far as what is afforded in animation.
Yeah, well, 18 months for 9 minutes. For as long as stop motion takes to make, this feels like it's like somehow even more labor intensive, because it's like pushing tiny pins through a screen.
Yeah, wild.
Yeah, but it feels very like expressionistic, and playing with perspective stuff I was like, I don't understand how they did this. This is crazy. There's a lot of really cool like kind of shape shifting. Yeah. Which is a big deal in like this era of animation, I guess, because there's a lot of that in Popeye also, of just like objects turning into other objects, and like, you know, that like a train that grows a face, whereas this is like a horse that turns into a different horse, or like a face that turns into a cloud into like a
it
a bunch of like teeth that like appear through stuff.
Yeah, this also has like a very it has a very Fantasia kind of vibe to it. It's just music. It is the song "Night on Bald Mountain," the classical song by Mussorgsky.
Sure.
And it's just a bunch of like really kind of, it's like the devil scene in Fantasia, just a bunch of macabre imagery set to that piece.
Right, because that piece is also used in Fantasia, right?
Oh, I don't know. Maybe it is. Oh, is it the same thing in Fantasia?
I'm not. It's been a while since I've seen it, so I'm not sure. But if so, then it's very likely that this short was an influence on Fantasia.
Wow, yeah, no way.
Because the imagery is very similar.
I'm a little distracted because my front window is open, and I think that the delivery guy just saw me podcasting, which is embarrassing.
Oh no. The greatest shame, being outed as a podcaster.
Do you have anything else on Night on Bald Mountain?
I don't think so. It's on Criterion Channel and not Spotify. Canopy. And probably YouTube also. Go watch it. It's cool.
And with that, let's move on to our feature presentation.
And now we're pleased to bring you our feature presentation.
Alrighty.
Shall we start with
Should we start with Glenn's obvious favorite? A classic, an absolute classic that you'd be insane to try and say anything negative about.
I don't think it'd be insane, but yeah, we'll talk about Duck Soup. The Marx Brothers movie, probably their most famous movie.
Yeah, that or A Night at the Opera.
Definitely the one that I was kind of familiar with the most. Like, yeah, Duck Soup, Marx Brothers. That one.
Which, directed by Leo McCarey, we kind of touched on, or I don't think the two, you and me, kind of talked about another movie called Duck Soup that was a short film that was a Laurel and Hardy, and he reused the title for this, going with the sort of animal theming of the previous Marx Brothers movies.
Animal Crackers, was it? Horse Feathers was the one we didn't watch, I think.
Yes.
And now Duck Soup, which, so I guess the backstory is that the previous Marx Brothers movies that we watched, I was not a big fan of. And so I was very curious to see how I would react to this one, which is like the one that everyone's like, it's the best. It's their best stuff.
Uh-huh.
And I thought it was pretty good.
Oh wow. Okay. Yeah. I mean, so when we watched Animal Crackers after watching Coconuts, I was like, oh, Glenn's going to hate this because it's exactly the same. And I wasn't feeling that as strongly watching this movie, but also it feels like more or less the same thing, but just maybe done better.
Right. It is like the setup and the structure of it. It is like they haven't changed their shtick at all in this movie, really. Like, their thing of like it takes place all in one location. Groucho is like some kind of wacky authority figure who shouldn't be in a place of authority. Like all of their character archetypes are the same. The sort of taking jabs at like high society are the same. But this one just feels a little more polished and a bit funnier, I guess. Like it just, I think it all kind of works a lot better in this movie than it has in the earlier ones. It feels like they're working out all of the. It's like they're basically making the same movie over and over again, and it's getting a little bit better each time.
Yeah, that is true, right? Like, and they're even using Margaret Dumont again. Who, really is like does feel very essential to the formula, much more essential than Zeppo.
Zeppo once again is like he's also there.
Yeah. And this is the last movie with Zeppo. He
oh really?
Yeah, he got sick of doing all this, and so
I mean, fair.
What I was hearing is that like Zeppo was quite funny and did have like a lot to contribute, but because he took over from their previous brother, who was the straight man, he was kind of relegated to the straight man. And he just felt unfulfilled in these Marx Brothers situations. So yeah, he went and did something else after this.
Yeah. I also think this movie has like, is almost like, feels accidentally very like timely. Because I feel like their previous movies are basically just kind of satirizing like high society and like wealthy American culture, kind of. Whereas this is sort of has a broader scope of like international politics and like European countries.
Right.
And so it feels very... the impression I get having seen it is that it's mostly making fun of like World War One and the sort of like politics leading up to World War One and like the state of Europe kind of like around that. But because it was released in 1933, it feels very kind of like not entirely what's the word I'm thinking of, like prophetic, I guess, but it's like it feels timelier than I think it was even intended to.
You mean timely as far as like the lead up to World War II?
Yeah. It's like it does kind of feel like it's maybe taking a couple jabs at like fascism also, but I wonder how much of that was like on their mind making this movie versus just sort of like in hindsight.
Yeah, hard to say. It does like, I do like this a lot better than the extremely amateurish like Animal Crackers and Coconuts, but it is a movie where it's just like a bunch of bits happen with a certain with a different coat of paint on them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And this coat of paint is rather than I don't know, a hotel owner or an adventurer, it is a guy who is appointed the leader of Freedonia. And then there are some spies around as well, which are played by Chico and Harpo.
Some very effective, competent spies, as you can imagine.
Yeah, you could consider this political. I think there are political aspects to it, but it's hard for me to see it as more than like a coat of paint in this movie.
Yeah, it does kind of feel like, and that's like the theme for this one. It doesn't necessarily feel like they have any sort of big take that they have on like the politics of the day. They were just like, I don't know, what if we have some like soldiers and pointy helmets in this one? Right.
Yeah. I think maybe like one of the most salient political ideas is just like the how flippantly a lot of the political figures will treat like, let's go to war, like let's do a war.
Yeah. Which is sort of, I feel like, primarily satirizing World War One, but little did they know that they were actually satirizing a future war also.
Well,
kind of.
I mean, World War One was definitely a lot more pointless than World War Two.
True. On that note, I did also read that Mussolini banned the movie immediately, which the Marx Brothers loved. They were like, hilarious.
There are one of my favorite lines from this, which felt very like almost the most modern joke in it, was I think it was Chico going like, "Shh, this is spy stuff."
Yeah, there's a lot of like, I think the dialogue in this one feels a little slower, so the jokes land a little bit better. There's definitely a lot of like really kind of classic Marx Brothers wordplay in this that I did think was very funny. Like, we need a standing army. Why a standing army? Because they've got to save money on chairs. It's just like, it's all very dumb, but I did like it this time more.
I don't get it. That's exactly the kind of stuff that you hated before.
I don't know. I just like, I think before it was like, it made me roll my eyes. And for some reason in this one, I think it landed better. Like, it was delivered better. It was like, the timing of it works better. I think they're just getting better at like performing on camera and like editing it properly. And now it's actually being funny.
And this is also the first one that we've seen that hasn't been an adaptation. It was specifically scripted.
Yeah. I think that probably helps also, because it does feel less like it's like playing to a live audience and more it's like playing to a camera. One of my favorite jokes in this happens pretty early on, and it's a great like 1, 2, 3 rule of threes joke, which is that Harpo will be riding a motorcycle up for Groucho to jump into the sidecar, and twice in a row, Groucho gets into the sidecar, and then Harpo just rides the motorcycle away while the sidecar stays still. Which is like, good funny joke. But then the third time, he gets in, Groucho gets on the motorcycle, and then Harpo drives just the sidecar away.
Yeah, Groucho thinks that he has defeated Harpo, but yeah.
Also, I just realized, I wrote down, why does nobody simply murder Harpo? Like, he's always bothering everyone around him. Everyone gets really mad at him. But everyone is just kind of fine. Like, no one does anything about it. He's just, like, causing chaos, and everyone's just sort of, like, huffing and puffing.
Harpo's bits are the kind of bits that I wish I did more in the world. I wish
You want to grab people's legs more?
I specifically grab their hand and use it to hold up my leg, and then make them wonder why they're holding up my leg. I've tried some Harpo bits in the last couple of days, and it didn't work out very well.
That's a shame.
It is fundamentally annoying.
You didn't ruin their lemonade stand?
Yeah, do like a grape stomping in the lemonade tank.
Yeah.
Some other kind of like I don't know, because I really love the Groucho quips. Where it's like he's telling people to get in the car, and he says, if you run out of gas, get Ethel. If Ethel runs out, get Mabel. Like, good stuff. He's got a nose like a bloodhound, and the rest of his face ain't that good either. Like, that's a solid joke.
It is, yeah. Like, I think the writing in this one just feels a little stronger than the other ones that we watched. I still think the editing in this is kind of janky. There's definitely some edits in this that are like, oof, yikes. But in general, this is not a movie that's really built around editing or even like visual gags that much. It's mostly like slapstick performance and wordplay. There's the mirror scene is very good. I think that's sort of like a famous bit from this movie.
That's right, yeah. Where Harpo and Chico end up impersonating Groucho by putting on a mask.
He does make himself very easy to be impostered.
He's wearing a disguise already.
Yeah.
He's wearing the classic disguise of a Groucho Marx mask.
But yeah, then Harpo and Chico are pretending to be him as if in a mirror, and sort of mirroring all his movements as he's standing in a doorway. And then the other one will enter the room, and so then there's two of him. Stuff like that. It's very, very cartoonish, but I think that stuff worked pretty well. Another thing of like a joke purely for a joke's sake, which is very much like a Groucho, or not a Groucho thing, a Marx Brothers thing of like, this joke doesn't need to make any logical sense. We're just going to put it in there because it's funny.
Right.
Which is another thing that a thing I have against Marx Brothers movies that I think worked better in this one is like, the jokes felt like they had a bit more intention. A lot of them felt less like they were there just for their own sake, kind of.
Yeah. One aspect that did kind of feel like it was there for its own sake, which continues on from the other stuff, is the musical parts, which this movie is like a musical for, 10 minutes and then stops being a musical. Specifically, this kind of opening song introducing Groucho.
Playing Rufus T. Firefly, which is a great name.
That's a good name, yeah. And the song has a very like Gilbert and Sullivan vibe to it. Mm-hmm. The thing that I really like, along with that political commentary we were talking about earlier, is him describing all the things that he's going to do as ruler. And anytime he starts off saying like, oh, if people rebel against me, pop goes the weasel, and then he starts saying, if they do some really innocuous thing that I don't like, pop goes the weasel. It's a brutal dictator.
Yeah, but that's the thing where it's like, oh, what a cut up. And then I'm like, in the context of this movie when it came out, like, that is a very dark joke.
Yeah.
And I don't know if that's how it was intended,
I think it was. It seems like this nod to some extreme darkness. We're at the end. We're closing in on the end of the pre-code era. We'll see how the Marx Brothers fare when they can't make references to death and sex.
Yeah, which they do a lot of in this movie. Actually, one instance where I think the editing in this movie is very good is right at the end, after war has been declared, and there's this like wild madcap scenes of war happening. Like, it's like every single individual shot, Groucho's uniform changes. Like he'll be in like a Revolutionary War uniform, and then like the next shot he's in like a Civil War uniform, and then like the next shot he's wearing like a completely different uniform. And it's like every time you see him, his uniform is completely different, just like between different shots, and it's very funny.
Pretty good, fun time.
Apparently this was not nearly as well received as the last few Marx Brothers movies, like at the time, which I think is kind of ironic because now it's like considered one of their best.
Mm-hmm.
But it was like kind of seen as like a weaker installment and like wasn't as successful as their other ones. But speaking of musical numbers,
yeah, let's talk about the Gold Diggers of 1933.
Indeed.
This movie was the biggest surprise to me of
I think it probably was for me too, because I really like this movie a lot.
Yeah. Yeah, I was honestly shocked at this movie being any good. My expectations were so low just because I was thinking about the Broadway melody too much.
Right, which is sort of like yeah, I think that was our kind of only real reference point for like early 1930s showbiz musical, but this one is quite a bit better. I mean, it went from being like Broadway Melody is a bad movie. This is a very good movie, I think.
Yeah.
Directed by, co-directed, I guess, or like different scenes are directed by, all of the kind of narrative stuff is directed by Mervyn LeRoy, who also did Little Caesar.
Mm-hmm.
And then all the musical numbers are directed by Busby Berkeley. Heard of him? And that stuff is like, I think this is the first actual Busby Berkeley musical movie that I've seen. Mm-hmm. But it's funny how familiar I am with that name of just like, oh yeah, Busby Berkeley musical. That's just like a reference point of like, that's what this other thing is like.
Yeah.
And also seeing that sort of very distinctive kind of visual style and like the way that stuff is shot and edited and like the production design of it. I'm like, oh, I'm so familiar with like this style, but just from like watching The Simpsons and like Looney Tunes and like things that have been, or like Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom, like things that have like taken the Busby Berkeley style of like a musical number. But it's funny then now going back and like actually watching a movie that is original.
Yeah, I'd like vaguely heard the name Busby Berkeley, but I scrolled through his filmography and I was really not familiar with any of the titles.
Right. It's like the actual movies I'm like not that familiar with, but like the style of musical number in this movie is like, oh, it's this. It's like really intricate choreography and like giant sets and like overhead shots of like dancers forming different shapes and things.
Yeah, I mean, like I will say that the musical segments in this movie, they are calling back to some of the best mid-20s kind of using cinematic like imagery in like a painterly way and like like in The Last Laugh or something like that, like just making interesting shapes and images with what you can do on screen. And so this movie, in some of these musical segments more than others, but like some of them are just creating these like paintings out of people.
They are like staggering to watch.
Yeah, like I was literally like my jaw hanging on the floor looking at some of these sequences. I was like getting a little misty just at like the beauty of it, you know.
And then they're also like at times very funny or very sad or like very dramatic. Like there's so much done with the musical numbers in this movie that it's like completely, most of them are like completely outside of the actual narrative of the movie, which we'll get into in a second. But like,
well, the idea with the musical numbers is they are from the musical that they are putting on,
right?
In the movie, but they are clearly like these kind of amplified, impossible to do in reality, but like versions of these musical numbers, right? It's like, it's not necessarily pretending this is what people are looking at on stage. It is just like, as we do a musical number, we go into like a liminal fantasy zone where we can express ourselves with music and dance in the most imaginative way possible.
Yeah. I think it might be the only instance of this that I've ever seen, because it's like normally in musicals there's either like all the musical numbers are like diegetic and exist within, it's like either they exist in like a musical reality or like all the musical numbers are putting on a show, whereas this movie kind of combines the two, where it's like we're putting on a show, but then once they do the actual musical number for the live show that they're doing, it does shift into this like magical reality, just kind of portraying that and then kind of shifting back once it's over.
Yeah, some of the images from this movie are just so cool, so cool, and it's not just images too. It's like creating moving image tableaus of people moving around in. I'm thinking like the images that I love the most are toward the end of the movie, where there are some we should really get into the structure of this movie soon, but there's a part with some like marching soldiers, and they are going like in an arch across the screen, and then they're kind of moving like across various planes of this archway with like a centerpiece in the middle, and they're in silhouette in the background, and there's another part where there are some people dancing in like a complete black void with these like really bright white dresses that create these just like really amazing shapes everywhere. And then they like take out some like neon violins.
The neon glowing violins are amazing. And I don't really know how they did that, other than maybe just like literally making like neon bulbs.
Yeah, I think they just made 40 neon violins.
The coolest thing in the world. This movie's also just a funny comedy outside of these amazing musical tableaus.
Yeah, yeah.
I think the title of this movie, I was like, oh boy, here we go. This is going to be like, I don't know. I kind of expected this movie to be less, I don't know, more sexist than it is, maybe.
You know, I wasn't even thinking about that, because I was like, this is old times, and they probably don't have the same use of gold diggers that we have today, but it's like, the same use.
Right, it's like, it's about people mining.
Yeah, or something like that.
It's not. It is the sort of common modern term, but this movie is based on a play from the 1920s where that terminology originates. Like, this is the story that invented that phrase of a woman who marries a man for his money, I guess, is the gist of it.
But it's also it's not that cynical. It's not that It's not that like sexist as you were saying. It is really a movie that is it's really a movie about like some people who are poor and find a way to enjoy themselves messing with rich people.
Yeah, this movie is maybe, of all the things we watch, like the most that is like directly about the Great Depression, which is also super interesting. I didn't expect from it at all to be like, that's like a major theme of this whole movie, is that it's like about people who are out of work in show business because their shows keep getting shut down because like the guys running them is in debt and having to avoid the landlord because they don't have money to pay rent.
Yeah, the opening song,
Steel and Milk.
It very much like deals with the Depression, which seems to be rare in movies set that were made during the Depression. They're more escapist, I guess. And this movie also is the only non-crime movie that I've seen to acknowledge speakeasies too.
A speaky is what they say.
They call it, yeah. But yeah, the opening song of this movie, "We're in the Money," is this almost like fantasy of the end of the Depression, and they talk specifically about the Depression's over. We can look the landlord in the eye. No, we got red money. Lines.
Yeah,
we're in the money,
which is I had heard that song tons of times. Did not know it came from this movie.
I heard that song tons of times, and I was like, oh, this is just in the culture. But I realized that, speaking of The Simpsons before, it's just that The Simpsons has referenced this movie 3 times within their, like, golden seasons.
Okay, see, that's... I assume you looked that up and you just didn't just know that off the dome, although you being you, that wouldn't surprise me. Yeah, I feel like there's so much in this movie where I was just like, I've seen this in The Simpsons for sure.
Yeah.
Like, and I think that's so funny that it's like just the way that like culture is forms and reforms, that like this is an old movie from the 30s. All the people who wrote The Simpsons are like nerds who grew up watching old movies.
Yeah.
And so they put all this stuff from like 30s and 40s movies into The Simpsons, and then we grew up watching The Simpsons, and so we're all like, oh yeah, like musical numbers and this and that, and then it's so funny now to like go back and watch the sources of all these things and be like, wait a minute, I thought The Simpsons invented all this stuff.
This is not the only movie we're going to talk about that has extensive Simpsons representation.
Oh yeah, I have, I know, yeah. I definitely have multiple other Simpsons references to talk about.
So yeah, like the rough plot is that there are a group of actresses who are kind of showgirls in Broadway reviews, and they live together.
They all live in one big bed.
And the opening scene is the kind of last attempt that they had to do a musical that got shut down, like right in the middle of dress rehearsals.
Yeah.
This guy Barney, who like I love his vibe. He is he's always telling people to scram.
Yeah, he's always like, but he's like such a kind of classical like showbiz producer character where he's like, all right, here's a plan. We're gonna have a 100 dancing girls in this thing. It's gonna be huge.
Then he comes to visit because they think they have another gig, and true to his showbiz producer ways, he goes, what's that piano sound over there? That's magic. Bring that guy over here. And so they one of the 4 girls is in love with this guy that's kind of across the way, who is a singer and piano player, and they eventually bring him in and do a whole musical based on his music.
He writes a bunch of songs for this new musical, but refuses to sing in the musical, and he won't say why.
He also like mysteriously appears with the $15,000 they need to fund the musical when their backers drop out. It's like, is this guy into crime? What's he doing?
Right. So then the showgirls are talking about it, like he's got all this mysterious money, like what's the deal there, and they think that he's robbed a bank, and so doesn't want to perform in the show because then people will see him and know, and he'll get caught by the coppers.
And Polly, who's in love with him, is like, it's okay, I'll love you even if you're a Toronto bank robber.
Yeah, she says, if he goes to prison for this, I'll visit him there. When Barney is talking about putting on the show, he's saying it's all about the Depression, and Trixie, who's the kind of comedian of the group, says we won't have to rehearse that. There's a lot of other kind of like very 30s wordplay jokes in this movie, which I enjoy. But the guy who's supposed to sing in the show gets lumbago on the day they're opening, and so he can't perform. So Brad is forced into singing in the show.
I've never heard the term lumbago.
Yeah. It's lower back pain, but I know it mainly from in Red Dead Redemption 2. There's a character who always complains about, it's lumbago. I can't work. I got lumbago.
So Brad finally agrees. This is the sexy neighbor. He finally agrees to take on the main role, and he's fantastic in it as expected. Mm-hmm. But then during the intermission, all these snoopy audience members go, "Who is this guy? He seems familiar." They
All
call
the
up some of
newspaper
their
men.
they call up some of their informants and realize that he is the heir to a fortune in Boston. He's part of a blue blood family in Boston, and that's where he got the money. And they print a big article saying famous rich boy slums it by being in a musical,
A massive Broadway musical.
and the rest of the story is his family, his brother, and their kind of
Their lawyer.
Like trying to intervene between Brad and Polly's relationship and trying to get Brad off of the show because this is undignified.
Yeah, they say, we cannot have you mixed up in this theater business.
So, and then the rest of the movie is like a lot of hijinks of them just like fucking with these rich people.
Yeah, really? Yeah, pretty much. You nailed it. Like, they don't really have an end game in mind so much as just like, let's mess with these guys. These guys suck.
And like Brad's on board with it. He's like the cool rich guy who shuns his family.
Yeah, he's like, I want to be in showbiz, and they're like, show business? What an undignified thing.
You should be composing classical music.
Yeah. I do really like the sort of how kind of exaggerated the wealthy brother and the lawyer are, of just like, oh dear me, like a theater, what a horrible place.
Yeah. You're watching the progress of their kind of like hoity-toity attitudes being broken down systematically by all of the interactions between them and the showgirls and Brad, including that's a lot of tricking them into thinking that one person is another person and all this kind of stuff.
Right, because then Carol, who's another one of the showgirls, pretends to be Polly and kind of seduces Brad's brother because he thinks that she is Polly, and he's trying to kind of seduce her away from his own brother so he won't get married. It's very complicated.
It's a selfless act. I'm going to seduce my brother's fiance to prove to him that that he should go back to the world of rich people.
It kind of starts with Carol and Trixie, who's the kind of like the comedian of the group. They are both kind of trying to seduce the brother and the lawyer just so they can get free stuff. Like, they kind of trick them into buying them really expensive hats. And so then they're like, we got to keep this going.
$75 hats.
Which $75 hat is like a $500 hat in the 30s.
No, actually, it's even more than that.
Okay.
So $75 for a hat would be quite a chunk of change now. It's nearly $2,000 in today's money.
Okay, there you go. Damn. But so, yeah, there's a lot of, like you said, a lot of hijinks.
The person who falls victim to their feminine wiles the most quickly is the lawyer Peabody. Peabody, and he...
Trixie gives him the nickname Fanny, which is very cheeky.
Yeah, they get a few jokes out of the Fanny line. And
he's very like wiping his brow all the time, and is like very flustered around all the gals.
Yeah, Brad's brother is initially like, it takes him a while to kind of break down, but he's just, as soon as they show him affection, Peabody is just
yeah.
And the biggest
holding
line,
his hat.
the biggest laugh that I got in this whole movie was like, they're kind of done putting the moves on these guys. They leave the scene, and then Brad's brother just goes, "Peabody, you're disgusting."
I also wrote down that line. It's a huge laugh for me. But then as right, so like Brad's brother is like so disdainful of like showgirls. He thinks they're all cheap and vulgar, as he puts it.
Yeah.
And naturally, because during this whole ruse that Carol is putting on Carol and the brother. What's the brother's name?
Brad's brother's name?
Yeah.
J. Lawrence Bradford.
Right. J. Lawrence Bradford and Carol naturally end up kind of actually falling for each other, despite each of them kind of trying to seduce the other one for like less honest intentions. And it's very sweet, I feel like.
It works. It's a movie where people almost Shakespearean, I guess, where everybody is everybody's trying to trick each other, but then eventually they all pair up and they end up being happily married by the end. Trixie and Peabody end up finding the truth in their relationship, and then the two of them and then Brad and Polly are kind of just chilling the whole time, watching the whole thing, watching the chaos happening around them and laughing at it. And if, to the title, it's Peabody who is talking about like the type of girls that showgirls are, and he calls them. He says, women of that type are chiselers, parasites, or we call them gold diggers.
Yeah, I feel like this movie has some fun like pre-code stuff. It's not that kind of salacious, but it is a little bit more than I'm used to seeing from old movies.
Yeah,
like definitely more so than a Hays Code era movie.
Yeah, I mean there are weed references in this, or there is a weed reference in this movie.
What? When?
There's I forget exactly the context. Somebody says something kind of ridiculous, and they says, "What does he use? I'll smoke it too." One of the ways that they're messing with Brad's brother is they get him really drunk at a speakeasy, and then they put him in Carol's bed to have him wake up in that bed, not knowing how he got there. Very directly, very directly implying certain things that they might not be able to so directly imply later.
There's the big musical number "Pettin' in the Park," which has a lot of references to doing it. There's some kind
of heavy petting.
There's some like nude silhouettes in that dance number. There's fun stuff.
But yeah, this movie was real cool. I liked it. Yeah, like I was saying, I had such low expectations, and I liked it a lot. One kind of strange thing that I don't know if this is the case with a lot of other musicals, but it seems like much of the musicals that have been coming out they've been about Broadway. They've either been like a filmed Broadway production, or they have been this kind of backstage drama thing where the musical numbers are supposed to be the sort of amped up versions of the diegetic musical numbers within the show. So we haven't yet seen a musical that just portrays a story and then like has musical numbers amplifying the story,
right?
Specifically,
other than like, I guess the Marx Brothers movies kind of do that.
Oh,
but
you know what? Yeah, you're right. Never mind.
At least up until Duck Soup, those were all based on actual stage shows.
Some of the previous ones, like Horse Feathers and Monkey Business, might not have been, but yeah. I guess one last note that I have about this movie is that in the opening "We're in the Money" song, I think it's Carol singing that, right?
I thought the opening song is sung by the other one, Faye, who is played by Ginger Rogers. I think is the singer during that one, but I might be wrong.
Well, she starts singing part of the song in Pig Latin.
Yeah.
For some reason, which is
very weird, but
it's a weird choice. But it also just made me realize that money in Pig Latin sounds like anime. So that's the last thing that I have to say.
Anime?
Anime, earway in hey, the anime.
Good note to end this discussion of this movie on. Another comedy from this year, also dealing with high society and romance.
Yeah.
Is Designed for Living, directed by Ernst Lubitsch. We're finally getting back to watching some of Lubitsch's Hollywood pictures.
Yeah.
Which I don't think we've talked about yet, right? We've only talked about his German silent stuff.
Yeah. It's been a minute since we've checked in with Lubitsch.
Yeah.
I guess the first movie we watched with him was 1918, something like that.
Now we're kind of in the era he's, I think, kind of most famous for.
Yeah, but he continues to be fantastic.
Yeah.
I loved this movie.
Me too.
This movie is so good.
This movie is really good, and like I feel like deserves to be like watched more than it is. Like this is a movie that I want to like recommend to people because it's very good.
This is another valiant entry into the fast talking 30s people are playfully mean to each other genre. And the dialogue in this is incredible. Like the actors are so charismatic, and they just deliver these lines with these just wry smiles that just, they get me. They get me.
Yeah. Also, I mean, the thing that this movie is like, I guess most famous for probably is that it's about a throuple, technically.
Yes. A developing, thriving throuple.
Yeah. And I think, like some of Ernst Lubitsch's other earlier movies, it doesn't fully commit to like a fully non-traditional like romantic relationship. Like I think some of I Don't Want to Be a Man does. I think by the end it does. I think it's left a little ambiguous, but I definitely take it to be like, oh yeah, they're a throuple now, and they're all fine with that.
Yeah, this does follow, as you're saying, it does follow in the Lubitsch tradition, or at least of movies of his that we've seen, of like challenging gender and sexuality.
Yeah.
In very direct ways that I think, are quite impressive and daring for the time.
This is like a poster movie for pre-code Hollywood, I feel like. This is a great example of like the kinds of movies that were being made in the early 30s before the Hays Code cracked the whip. And it's making me like anticipate 1934, 1935 movies that are like post-code and be like, God damn it, like these pre-code movies are so fun. I'm so annoyed that this happened. Yeah. And we're like, this is gonna go away. But I'm really excited to see like Ernst Lubitsch movies that are made during the Hays Code, and like how he kind of will, I'm sure, circumnavigate those arbitrary rules and like still make fun stuff that is still kind of like challenging the societal norms.
Yeah. And in this movie, just like the ways that they challenge this stuff, we can get into a little bit. Like after establishing some of the plot here, which is the movie's set primarily in France, or initially in France, and there are three Americans who meet each other, or two best buds of 18 years, and then they're on a train car, and a spunky lady appears and starts razzing them. She starts harassing them in charming ways.
Yeah, pretty much.
And they both simultaneously fall in love with her.
Yeah, like immediately, simultaneously. Yeah,
to the point that they're immediately jeopardizing their decades-long friendship over this lady.
The two best buds are played by Gary Cooper, who we've seen in a few things, and Frederick March, who was in Merrily We Go to Hell. He was also the male lead in that movie.
Oh, I didn't recognize him from that. Yeah.
Much like in that movie, he also plays a playwright who is down on his luck. In this,
typecast.
He says, "I write unproduced plays," when he introduces himself, which is a good line. A funny thing about when the kind of three main characters all meet, they're in France, and so they start speaking French to each other, and then they realize that everyone's American, and so the two men just start singing the national anthem and saluting to say that they're Americans, which I think is how every American should introduce themselves in other countries. Just like if you meet another American, you have to like salute and sing the national anthem.
It's hilarious. I think by that point, I was just so sold on this movie. Like when they meet each other in the train at the beginning, the banter is already so good, and the comedy hits so hard. And the rest of this movie, I my face was sore from just like smiling the entire time.
Yeah,
it was just joyful every moment.
Maybe this is just my own kind of. This movie's definitely a lot more like highbrow than the Marx Brothers, but I also think I think this movie's much funnier than Duck Soup. So
yeah.
I don't know. I think a lot of that's just writing. Like it's like all the jokes come out of character. They don't feel as kind of random and slapdash. There are some kind of similar like wordplay things, like what's your salary in round numbers? In round numbers, 0.
But so it's based on a play, and I think a lot of these kind of jokes feel very like stagey jokes, like stage banter jokes. But yeah, I think so much of it works, but also like a lot of it is owed to just the charisma of the main characters.
Yeah, all 3 leads in this movie have insane charisma. I think Gary Cooper was the one that kind of stood out to me because I'm used to seeing Gary Cooper in more like dramatic roles, I guess. Like I think of like High Noon or something from later on, but he's very funny in this movie.
Yeah, no, they're all great.
Yeah.
Once they realize that they're all falling in love, it all kind of the best friends end up starting to like try and spite each other and hate each other, and they're like, we can't be doing this, like we're friends, we're not gonna let some dame tear us apart. And eventually, and then she comes by and they both fall apart again, and then Gilda, who is the woman they meet, she says she finds herself in a position that men usually find themselves in, which is that she's in love with 2 people and has to make the decision but can't. So some commenting on gender roles and stuff there of kind of traditionally like it's like women are like they choose one person and then men are trying to like talk to everybody at once kind of thing. But she just can't get over the fact that she loves both of them equally, and they can't get over how much they love her in spite of each other. And they agree that they'll live together as friends. And another kind of very pre-code moment is they just specifically, using the word, say no sex.
Yeah. Which really stood out to me as like, old movies don't say sex in them. And other than pre-code movies, right? And so it's like, this is another really good example of like how pre-code movies just feel more kind of alive because they're not hampered by a bunch of dumb arbitrary rules all the time.
Yeah.
But so, yeah, they come to a gentleman's agreement, as they put it, to like, they're going to live platonically. They're going to like platonically just have, she can see both of them, but they're going to keep it as platonic. And then almost immediately, Tom, who's the playwright, played by Frederick March, gets his play gets produced, and he has to go off to London to oversee his play, leaving the other 2 just to kind of stew in sexual tension, which does not last long.
He worries about when they leave. I love also like he's going back and forth about trying to leave to London, and this movie has so much indecision in it. Mm-hmm. It's so much about people like coming up with something and then like going, oh no, I shouldn't. And the scene where he's leaving, he's having this debate about whether he should go. He decides to stay in Paris, and then smash cut to him leaving to London.
Yeah. There's a lot of really good like smash cut jokes in that. Like there's one earlier when it's like they're kind of establishing how Gilda is in love with both of them, and one of them like to camera almost says like, I'm in love, and then it like cuts to her making out with the other one.
I think it like this stuff kind of plays into the theming of the movie too, of like it being about indecision, and then showing that with the editing as well,
and kind of like contradiction too. Like,
yeah. But yes, that they had the gentleman's agreement Gilda says, "I'm not a gentleman." And then,
like the same night, pretty much. He's like, "Well, I'm not a gentleman, so."
and yeah, so they get together. Then Tom's sad. Then
right. Well, because Tom doesn't know that until later. Like, he's at the premiere of his play, and he finds out, and does not enjoy his premiere at all. And so then it's like he returns to Paris after a period of time.
And at this point, he's kind of like forgiven them, basically, or He's forgiven his friend because he knows how hopelessly in love both of them are.
Yeah.
But he hasn't forgiven Gilda for what she's done. So he gets back to Paris, and after yelling at each other for a while, they immediately hook up.
Yeah. while Gary Cooper is out of town, and so then when he comes back, they're like, "Oh, we gotta tell him that we hooked up while he was out of town." And someone says like, "Oh, he's gonna break something," and they say, "We have to tell him the truth, regardless of what happens to the furniture," which is also a good line. And then later, they do tell him, and he is angry, and just off screen, you hear the sound of breaking dishes, and they just kind of nod to each other like, "Yeah, we knew this would happen."
Yeah, and so there's a lot of back and forth in this movie about like who's with who and everything, but like it's all this kind of, they respect each other, but they are completely incapable of holding back their feelings for each other. Gilda eventually tries to kind of solve the problem by leaving the situation entirely and marrying her nerd sycophant.
Right. This guy Plunkett, who is kind of like her like boss, manager guy.
Caretaker. Like,
yeah, he says caretaker, which is like a very vague role. I think early on, someone kind of like makes fun of him for like not marrying her or like hooking up with her. One of them says, he never got to first base, which I'm assuming is like the base system, which when was that established? Like, was that a thing in the 1930s? Did people refer to like baseball bases as like levels of like sexual encounter? I don't know.
It's the term gold diggers, bases, like these are things that existed longer than I thought. I think the thing that throws me a little bit with some of these older movies is that they, the word they use for making out is making love, which is not the same as it became. But yeah, she is eventually extremely unhappy with this guy, this compromise.
This guy Plunkett, who sucks.
Yeah, he
is who she decides to marry, and it's immediately a bad idea.
He is very much like about keeping up heirs with the rich people around him, or whoever like is interested in the whatever thing. So like he has a party and he's like, "Oh, you've got to be interested in concrete, Gilda." Well, like, also, this guy is the #1 man in concrete.
On their wedding night, he keeps trying to like kind of get her to go to bed with him, and she is like, "No." Like, he keeps saying, "I have an appointment tomorrow morning," and she's like, "All right, go to bed by yourself." And he is like sheepishly go to bed by himself. Yeah, he's throwing this like fancy high society party that Gilda hates because it's terrible, because he's trying to introduce her to all of the concrete magnates.
Yeah. The other thing on their wedding day was he asks her if she loves him, and she says like, "You don't ask that on your wedding day." like it's either too early or too late for you to ask me that. Which was a good way of her dodging the question.
Yeah.
But yeah, this is, probably a year later or something like that. And then Tom and George end up showing up at this party.
Yeah, they crashed his high society tuxedo party.
And then...
where everyone is playing 20 questions.
Oh my God, 20 questions!
Yeah. Plunkett loves 20 questions, and I feel like Ernst Lubitsch hates 20 questions, because he's like, what's the worst thing that can happen at a party is playing 20 questions.
And literally it's so ridiculous. Like him running to every room in the house going, we're playing 20 questions. We're playing 20 questions. Come on over. And then everybody's like, oh God, we're playing 20 questions. It's so exciting. It's 1933 and this is exciting.
And Gilda is like, if I play 20 questions, I'm going to shoot myself.
Sometimes when I throw a party, I feel like Plunkett here, because I'm just like, everybody's got to be happy. We gotta run over here, make sure this happens, you know. But yeah, Tom and George crash the party and meet Gilda up in her room, and they eventually all realize this was silly. We shouldn't have been mad at each other. We should all just become a throuple. We should all just you should leave Plunkett because we knew that wasn't serious in the first place, and you should be with the two of us, and we're gonna love you both at the same time. Yeah, we're both gonna love you at the same time.
Because like it ends with them saying like, all right, we're gonna, like, they say like gentleman's agreement, and everyone's like, okay, gentleman's agreement. But I feel like that could be interpreted either as them agreeing to live together platonically as per their original agreement, or it's a reference to the fact that that agreement immediately went out the window and that they should just agree to be an actual throuple.
I think it's like a winking thing with a gentleman's agreement, because right after they say that, she kisses one of them and then kisses the other one. Yeah. And that's how the movie ends, is they're riding away in a car and they all just poly smooched each other.
Yeah. There is a line when Gilda is yelling at Plunkett where she says, your whole flock of eagle-bowers, eagle-bower being the family of concrete magnates. But it's said quickly enough that I legitimately thought the line was, your whole fucking eagle-bowers. And I was like, wait, did they just drop an F-bomb in this movie? Like, pre-code is going hard, but I put on subtitles and it was flock of. So
the only the most extreme language we've seen in the pre-code movie has been Hell's Angels, and it really has not been matched since then.
Where they say damn.
They say goddamn, and they say son of a bitch.
Yeah. So yeah, this movie made it through. The Hays Code existed when this movie was made, but it just wasn't really as enforced as it would be like a year or two later. This movie was, however, banned by something called the Legion of Decency, which I had never heard of, but it is a Christian group from the 1930s that I guess existed to try to keep decency alive. And they were not a fan of this picture.
Not surprised.
Yeah, but I am. I think it's a good one.
Yeah, I love this movie. It's so good.
I really want to.
It's so funny. And it's so charming. It's great.
It's like surprisingly progressive for when it came out. I feel like this movie would be progressive now. Like, I still don't think like a romantic comedy about polyamory is like it's not like a common thing. I mean, I guess any romantic comedy now is uncommon, and it's like, oh my god, someone made a romantic comedy. I really want to seek out, even if not for the show, like I want to watch more Ernst Lubitsch movies, because there's just such a kind of, all of the stuff that we've watched from him has this really kind of infectiously fun tone to it.
Yeah.
And it's very cheeky, and yeah.
Yeah, I think if you were to show people, like anybody, an old movie, like this would be something that could scratch at modern, modern sensibilities.
Yeah.
There's nothing about this movie that feels like you're watching something too old.
Yeah, yeah.
Changing gears a whole bunch.
Yeah, I guess we kind of, there's no real clean transition, I guess, to the next movie.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it is like, as per, I'm talking about The Testament of Dr. Mabuse, directed by Fritz Lang, who has said, is like very outspoken about, this movie is about Nazis and like Nazis taking over Germany, and kind of like the fear and like just the bad vibes that brings with it.
Yeah, it is about like it's reaching at some kind of like fundamental anxiety that you would be feeling as a German citizen at the time.
Yeah.
Though it is kind of in line with what Fritz Lang has been doing, which is ping-ponging back and forth between seriousness and pulp.
Mhm.
And like, this is definitely pulp.
Yes.
This like M is a very like dark, serious movie.
Yeah,
and
for
then
sure.
like and there's a character, like the police inspector character is like held over from the movie M.
Mhm.
But in this movie, he's in like a proto James Bond, like proto Roger Moore James Bond, you know?
Right. Yeah.
But yeah, like Spies, it's very like, you know, Spectre and
Mhm.
secret agents and
This
all
movie
kind of
feels
stuff.
like Spies and M had a baby, kind of. Like,
yeah.
it's like the pulpy, like, supervillain stuff from Spies meets the kind of, like, more grounded, like, crime procedural stuff from M.
Yeah.
This movie premiered in Budapest, Hungary, because it was immediately banned in Germany, like, before it was even released. It did not play in Germany. They had to have the premiere in a different country. Because, the Nazi propaganda machine was not a fan of this picture.
Yeah. I believe this is the last movie that Fritz Lang made in Germany.
Yes, he
before moving to the US.
immediately after this movie, I think he left his wife, Thea von Harbu, and moved to the US, kind of like under threat of death. Like, I know that Goebbels tried to get Fritz Lang to be like the head of the Nazi propaganda machine. Like, he was like, we want you to like head the Nazi film industry, and Fritz Lang was like, no thank you. And so then he like had to kind of flee Germany in the night almost, because it was like he had people like staking out his house and things like that.
Yeah. We had kind of made some assumptions, I think, in previous episodes that he left his wife because of her association with Nazis, but I was reading up on Thea von Harbo, who wrote this movie. This was her final collaboration with him, too. They broke up like during the production of the movie. And it's a little unclear exactly what her associations with Nazis is. She stayed in Germany during the Nazi regime and collaborated on films with the Nazis. The specific reason that he left her was, I guess, Fritz Lang was always like going after other ladies, and so she finally did. They kind of they knew what was going on, but she finally did. And then Fritz Lang found her with another director, and then he called it off. So even though he's not the Nazi in this relationship, he is he's not a scoundrel.
Oh no,
either.
yeah, he was for sure a scoundrel. I mean, he like, on his Wikipedia page, there's stuff like he might have murdered one of his previous wives. We don't know. Like, Fritz Lang was a bit of a scoundrel for sure. I think scoundrel even is like too playful of a word. Like, he might have been a real piece of shit. I don't know, but this movie is I'm a fan.
Yeah, it's a fun one.
I didn't really expect this movie to be, I guess, what it is. I mean, this movie is a sequel to Dr. Mabuse the Gambler, which we
missed.
We missed because it's 4 hours long. But that movie is about a supervillain who like uses hypnosis and like commits all these crimes and then gets caught at the end. And then this movie is picking up where he has been, and like this movie was made like 10 years after that, and it's like in real time he has been locked up for 10 years in an insane asylum,
which is cool. Yeah.
I expected this movie to be like, oh, he's going to break out of prison and like resume his crime empire. But I think the movie
you kind of want to think that for a while.
The movie is way more interesting than that, because it's more like he hypnotizes his doctor into like becoming the new Dr. Mabuse after he dies, which is crazy.
I wonder if it was like how much of it was hypnotizing and how much of it was the things that Dr. Mabuse wrote in his journals were so insane that they broke the mind of his therapist.
It's like, it's kind of that too, but it's like Dr. Mabuse is such a like brilliant mind that is also insane and evil, that just like by being around him, it like corrupts you.
It's like a Harley Quinn situation.
Right, but it's like he's almost transferring like his own criminal mind, his own essence into his psychiatrist.
We see Dr. Mabuse like die in this, or like a carcass of
and I'm like,
cadaver.
Oh, he faked his death, and it's like, no, he really does die. But then it's
like he lives on through
his ideas and his plans and plots.
So while he was in the asylum, he was like frenzied, scrawling all of these plans, very, very meticulous plans for crime operations. Mm-hmm. This is reading this, and also like his philosophy on spreading chaos through the world, and that is the testament of Dr. Mabuse, the titular testament. His kind of last will and testament, was so powerful that his empire was able to continue on without him. And so in a sort of like Videodrome Brian Oblivion fashion, the psychiatrist ends up taking the mantle of Dr. Mabuse, but then doing it only through voice. And his crime empire still exists, but it's propped up by like a Wizard of Oz phantom of the original Dr. Mabuse, hidden behind a curtain with a microphone and a silhouette to order people around.
Yeah, and Fritz Lang made a third Dr. Mabuse movie in the 60s that I think is also like a direct sequel to this movie of like Dr. Mabuse has been dead for 30 years, but somehow he's back. And they're, at least I think this one and the first one are based on like pulp crime novels, sort of like Fantomas-esque books. And I think in those there's like even more of a sense of like the supernatural around Dr. Mabuse. Like he might be like more of an evil spirit than a person who like possesses, like his like essence is like transferred from person to person.
Like Irma Vep.
I guess kind of, right, if we're going on by the Irma Vep like TV show.
Yeah.
But yeah, I love the like such a main like pillar of this movie is the idea that like ideas can be dangerous, and that like just the fact that Dr. Mabuse is like writing this stuff down. He doesn't even have to be like enacting all these criminal plans. Like as long as people are following his instructions, like it'll still happen. And even after he's dead, like he's still sort of like exerting his evil influence. Because also Dr. Mabuse's whole thing is like he's not in crime to like make money or to like grab power. Like he just wants, to paraphrase a movie directly inspired by this one, he just wants to see the world burn.
Yeah, Chris Nolan had his screenwriter watch this movie
his screenwriter, his brother.
The other Nolan.
Yeah, Jonathan Nolan.
I just realized that me and my brother have the same names as the Nolan brothers.
Do you have a secret third brother who's a con artist?
That's none of your concern.
Oh, well, damn.
Maybe.
But you can definitely see a lot of how much Christopher Nolan has sort of not necessarily directly lifted from this movie, but I think he's clearly a fan of Fritz Lang movies. And this movie is, I think, like this and Metropolis are the two that I think that is the most apparent in. Because yeah, there's definitely a lot of like supervillain Dark Knight stuff in this one. And
also, Metropolis is the name of where Superman lives.
True. And yeah, I think like Spies, there's a lot of like James Bond stuff. The sort of like literal man behind the curtain is very kind of Blofeld-esque. Even if it turns out to be an elaborate ruse in this one. There is some great like crime spy stuff of like the being locked in the room with the ticking bomb and having to escape. That
like having to use your wits to escape.
Yeah, that whole section is great.
It is just like, as we were watching Spies, we were saying this, like James Bond owes so much to these movies.
Yeah, like to a degree that I had no idea before watching them. Yeah.
Like apart from like kind of like, I don't know, sort of, Spectre's an evil organization, but like it's not like talking about real organized crime stuff. And I think this does touch on this kind of gritty aspects of organized crime where they talk about like, oh yeah, we're selling like cocaine, morphium, and cocaine, morphine, and opium.
Yeah.
Talking about actual drugs. Yeah. Instead of just making a reference to them.
Yeah, it's like, it is kind of, like I said before, like marrying the really pulpy James Bond stuff from Spies with the like really grounded like crime procedural stuff in M. Like, there's a bit in this where a guy is assassinated in his car during a bunch of honking horns, which is great. And then the cops investigating it are using like ballistics to like, the angle of the bullet, and like the bullet was clearly fired from this gun because we tested the bullet. We like compared the bullets being fired from different guns, and this one matches.
Yeah.
Which I think is I've never seen that in a movie before this, and it's really cool. And then besides the sort of like Dr. Mabuse, the guy is like barely in this movie. He's only in like a couple of scenes. Mm-hmm. And then there's like the crazy hallucination of him, which is amazing.
Which Fritz Lang said that he regretted keeping the supernatural elements in
because that stuff is amazing. Story. Like, that stuff is so cool.
I think that like the double exposure, like he's seeing the phantom of Dr. Mabuse. I think that stuff's like, you could play that however, like that could just be like his imagination or that kind of thing, as the psychiatrist has been driven insane. But it goes as far toward the end of the movie as doing a like The Shining style, like the ghost is opening doors to help people out.
It's like this guy thinks that a ghost opened the door, and then other people see that like it's not necessarily like no one else could have opened the door, but it's like from this one character's perspective, who is clearly is hallucinating and is unhinged. It's like, I don't know, it's ambiguous enough that I think it works as like, how did this door get opened? Maybe it was a ghost. We don't know.
Right. It's interesting, the ghosts.
Yeah. And that stuff is like, there's a lot of cool like expressionism stuff in this movie during when we're like in the heads of people who have gone mad. Kind of like, there's the doctors like seeing like phantoms of Dr. Mabuse and like hearing his voice talking to him and things like that. And there's also the guy who is like an informant for the cops who is like driven insane, and then is like there's a bit where he's like answering the phone, and we see like the room he's in is like a normal table and like chairs, but then we see it kind of from his perspective, and everything's made out of glass and like is transparent. Super cool.
Yeah, that's really neat. Them like trying to get information out of this informant, but his mind got so broken that like he cannot really tell them anything, and they're just trying to like divine what information they can out of his out of like the state that he's in, and like the things that he's saying. He's kind of like stuck in this moment of like pre-attack from when he was getting silenced by the gang.
Dr. Mabuse is played by Rudolph Kleinrog. I'm probably butchering that again, but this is what happens when I do no research. But he's the guy who played the mad scientist in Metropolis, and the supervillain guy in Spies also.
And he played Dr. Mabuse in the original.
Right,
also.
Yeah. He does not return in the third Dr. Mabuse movie, as far as I know.
Looks like he died before the 60s.
Yeah. But his voice in this movie is really... like, he's like talking in a whisper, and like people are just kind of hearing it in their own heads, and it's very unsettling. The kind of main characters they're actually following for most of it are, there's the police inspector, Lohman. That isn't the guy's name in M, but it is like almost the same character, right?
Yeah, he's Inspector Carl Lohman in M as
okay.
well.
Oh, cool. So I guess this is
they got a bit of
the Fritz Lang cinematic universe,
the Langiverse. It's like a Tarantino thing where you got your recurring characters.
Oh, that is cool though. I didn't really put that together. So the police inspector from M is also in this movie, and smokes lots of cigars and is a hard ass. Then we also follow Tom and Lily, and Tom is a criminal who works for Mabuse's like crime gang. But he's also in love with Lily and is sort of torn between.
He's trying to get out.
The two worlds. Yeah.
He's haunted by. He doesn't want to kill nobody, and he's haunted by the killing that he's done. But he can't get out of the criminal gang.
He does eventually confess to Lily that he went to jail for murdering his last girlfriend. And Lily's like, that's okay. I forget. You seem okay. And it's like, okay. I would take that as a bit of a red flag, but...
like, yeah, let's just hit the brakes for a second.
Lily is very understanding. But so, yeah, eventually Tom fails to show up to work at crime. him and Lily are put in the sort of like secret meeting room and find out that the man behind the curtain is just a speaker and like a wooden cutout. And they're locked in and there's a ticking. So they're going to get blown up, but they can't escape. And there's the whole scene of them trying to like cut through the ceiling, like pull up the floorboards and get to the floor. Like they can't get out of the room. So Tom decides to break the pipes to flood the room so that when the bomb goes off, the force will be dissipated through the water, and then the bomb will open a hole in the floor that they can escape out of.
It's also got this like whole, like there's other plot stuff happening at the same time. So it's sort of like doing this thing that's done in a lot of movies these days, which is just like, you know, you've got like this tense scene and you keep kind of like coming back to it as it develops.
Yeah.
While like, and like the other scenes that it's intercutting with are kind of relieving some of the tension, but then creating some of their own tension at the same time. A
lot of the editing in this movie rules. Like there's a lot of like intercutting between different kind of like parallel scenes happening. There's lots of like a character starting a conversation and then like we cut away to a different scene, but that conversation carries over into it because that's what they're talking about. There's a really great transition where someone holds up a photo of someone and then it like transitions to that person like, sitting in the exact same position.
Yeah.
Yeah. And there's like so many different like kind of threads that we're following that it's sort of jumping between them all really well. And then it kind of ends with like Mabuse's plan works. Like he blows up this factory and like releases poison gas into the air. And it's like, it's only after that they kind of like figure out that he's sort of like imprinted his own mind onto his psychiatrist.
Right. Like the success of the movie is that they have determined what's going on, but like his plans were good and he won.
Yeah. Yeah. And yeah, like his plan isn't like, it's just to like mess up Germany, basically. Fritz Lang really, being subtle on that one.
You were talking about the cigars that Lohmann smokes, and I forgot to bring up that cigarette bit was in Gold Diggers.
Right.
That was also in Popeye. Do you have anything else on the Testament of Dr. Mabuse?
I don't think so. I mean, I really like this one a lot and was very surprised by the twists and turns that it took.
Yeah, it's a fun one. 1933 is a solid year.
Very good movie year. Yeah.
Another movie that is about a completely antisocial guy who wants to destroy the world is The Invisible Man.
Ugh. What a picture.
Which also rules.
Yeah. A returning director.
Yes, this is James Whale, who we saw on Frankenstein as well. And in many ways, The Invisible Man feels like him kind of like redoing Frankenstein, like his version of Frankenstein. There's a lot of similar plot elements, but I think this movie is executed a lot better than Frankenstein.
Yeah.
Frankenstein's good, but this is like really good.
Yeah. This is definitely, for the show, this is definitely my favorite Universal monster movie that we've watched so far. We're kind of hitting all the big ones. But even like in the grand scheme of them, of like all of them that I've watched, I might like Creature from the Black Lagoon more than this, but like this might be my favorite Universal monster movie.
Yeah, I mean this movie it's really intense.
Yeah.
It's like the Invisible Man is very threatening. And the voice work that the guy who they hired to play him,
Claude Rains.
he was a relatively inexperienced actor, and a lot of people like didn't think that he would be very good on on screen. He had just kind of been in stage stuff, and he didn't screen test very well. But James Whale hired him just based on his voice, which is what he mostly is in this in this movie.
Yeah.
And his voice is very imposing.
It is him like playing him in the bandages also, I think. But yeah, it is like he gets so much out of that voice. It is really a sort of like a very voice forward, naturally, performance. And yeah, Claude Rains crushes it. He's got a great voice for this character. I feel like this is another instance where it's like the Claude Rains Invisible Man voice is like has become such a thing where it's like if you want almost like an evil mastermind voice, it's like do that. Like that's kind of right in the book on it almost.
Yeah, especially a British one.
Yeah. Interestingly, like both the Invisible Man and Dr. Mabuse are these sort of like criminal mastermind types who just want to like blow things up. And Dr. Mabuse talks in like a hoarse whisper all the time. He's always whispering into people's ears and stuff. Whereas the Invisible Man likes to make very grand declarations and yell at people and complain about people entering his room.
Yeah, I mean, for like he is in, both of these characters are invisible in some ways. But Dr. Mabuse is kind of using that invisibility to like seed ideas, and this guy is just like, do what I say, damn it.
Yeah. Or I'll strangle you when you least expect it.
Yeah, he's using his invisibility to in like an extremely like threatening, ominous way.
Yeah.
There's a scene where he talks about like, what he can do and his ambitions for like ruling the world. And because he's figured out the secret to becoming invisible, and he's like, I will make like the governments of the world compete for who was going to get this secret from me. Like they'll grovel at my feet. Everyone's going to worship me. I can rape and kill like however much I want. Like it's very extreme.
Yeah. He really goes off the deep end.
Part of the framing of all of this is that the serum that makes you invisible also makes you crazy.
Right. He uses a fictional chemical called monocaine, which is a sort of bleaching agent, but then also just happens to cause murderous thoughts and megalomania. Makes you go mad. I did think it was kind of funny. They're like, monocaine, it comes from India, which feels like them kind of like, it's a far off place that we don't know about. It's scary.
The Orient.
Yeah. It's very like, it's foreign. It's scary. But so I like how this movie kind of starts with him already invisible, already crazy, already like plotting awful things. Like we don't see him as a scientist before any of this. Everyone just talks about Jack Griffin, the scientist, as like, he was obsessive, but he's like a swell guy. We never meet that guy. We never see him. People only talk about him. It's like the only Jack Griffin we ever interact with or like see on screen, or not see on screen, more like, is crazy invisible Jack Griffin.
He's not just invisible, he's crazy invisible.
Yeah, he is crazy invisible. Classic, iconic look of him with like wrapped up in bandages with either goggles or red sunglasses.
Yeah.
I'm a big fan of his wardrobe in this movie, I gotta say. Because he's got like two looks. He's either like in a suit with like big goggles and the bandages over his face, or he's in like nice pajamas and a robe and bandages and like cool Victorian sunglasses.
This movie starts with him walking into a town like I don't know, like in does that happen in Frankenstein? No. I guess
there's kind of a similar scene in Dracula where they're like coming to town, but
Dracula. Yeah, but it's not the bad guy, I guess, in Dracula. It's Renfield actually. Yeah. So it is kind of like, but anyway, he is kind of following some road signs in a snowstorm to like, and he ends up in this village called Iping in Sussex, and finds his way into this inn with these people with very funny accents. Including,
all right, here you are, governor. Very, very Cockney, heavy-duty English accents in this movie.
Including, and so, he goes up into his room. He's very rude to people. He would have been fine, honestly, if he wasn't so rude.
Yeah. It's a side effect of the serum also. It makes you very rude.
Like, if he just wanted to be left alone to work on his invisibility serum so that he can become invisible and cure himself at will, and then make other people invisible if they give him piles of gold.
Right. Well, because initially he is trying to figure out a way to make himself visible again.
Yeah.
And then kind of abandons that as his insanity deepens, and he is just concerned with causing mayhem.
He's not nice to all of these people in the inn, and also they're not that nice to him because they think he's weird because he's covered in bandages, and and they want to spy on him and all that. So that's not very nice. But I mean, speaking of the accents, they end up, he ends up getting a little violent with them, and they call a cop over, and the cop they call over, the Bobby that they bring over, he says, "What's all this then?"
Yeah, I cheered.
He's a very bumbling cop, and when he starts going on a bit more of his murderous rampage, and the actual police get involved, they start shaming this guy for being a bit of a bumbling fool.
Well, at first no one believes that there's an invisible guy.
Yeah.
Because the townspeople kind of bust into, after he's pushed people down the stairs, they bust into his room, and he's like, you think I'm just a crazy person? Check it out, I'm also invisible. And he takes off his bandages in a very cool scene that is still, I think, very impressive to look at. The VFX of it.
Looking at the invisibility scenes, and the kind of reveal of the Invisible Man, it's amazing. It's the best effects I've seen in any movie so far.
Mm-hmm. At least until the next movie that we talk about. Yeah, super impressive. Holds up surprisingly well. He takes off all his clothes and goes on a little invisible rampage through the town. Which I do like how this movie is set during winter. And so it's when he's going full invisible, he can only kind of do it for short periods of time because it's so cold out. And he's like, I'm freezing, I need to go inside, put clothes on.
Yeah, there's a naked invisible man wandering around.
Yeah. Which I think the movie does acknowledge more than I kind of thought it would, that it's he gets really cold.
This movie is very concerned with the mechanics of him being invisible. Or it also talks about how he can't go out and commit his crime sprees if he's eaten in the last hour because the undigested food still is visible hanging in his stomach.
I do wish they showed that, but
yeah,
I also understand why they didn't. He points out, it's he has to keep his nails clean because the dirt under his fingernails will give him away.
Yeah, it's very, very well thought out. Yeah. All of the mechanics of it.
I do think it's funny. He's talking about all his grand, and some of which he does get into, of causing accidents and disasters and things to happen. But initially, all of his sort of crimes as an invisible person are pushing people down the stairs, or spilling their drinks, or tripping people, or taking their bicycle.
Yeah. It starts
very small,
innocent.
Yeah, not really innocent, but he's just kind of using his invisibility to fuck with people.
But at the beginning, he's fed up with all of these townies, and so he's like, look at me, I'm stealing your bicycle. Isn't that silly?
He does eventually. He breaks into the house of his former friend and kind of demands that he be his visible helper in all of his crimes against humanity. Another
shared element of this with Frankenstein is that there's two scientist understudy buddies, who one goes off and does something crazy, and the other one's after his girl at the same time.
Super obviously after his girl. Yeah. Jack Griffin and Dr. Frankenstein are very similar characters and are like treated in very similar fashions, I think, in both these movies. James Whale loves a mad scientist who's going off the rails.
Yeah. Jack Griffin, he starts exerting his invisible powers upon his old buddy. And very quickly makes his threats like very real. He's like, I could be anywhere. Like, you like can't escape me. I can follow you and you won't know it. It's all like very threatening. It's all like, once he has decided to use his power to manipulate people, it's very easy for him to do so, and it's like terrifying. Like, he is invisible. There's nothing you can do about it.
Well, that's the thing, is like, I feel like as a monster, the Invisible Man initially is sort of like, he's invisible, like, who cares? Like, what's he gonna do? I think this movie does a really good job of explaining like how terrifying that implication really is.
Yeah.
One of just like, if someone's invisible, then they can sneak up on you and like stab you or like choke you to death. His sort of preferred method of murder is strangulation, which is a scary way to kill someone.
Yeah.
But then I think that this movie does really well, and that I was very impressed by and kind of didn't expect there to be as much of this as there is that as the movie goes on, you start to get more and more just kind of like uncertain about whether or not he's even in the room in certain scenes.
Yeah.
Like, the other characters are starting to be like, we have to just assume that he's always next to us because he might be. And
it's so good.
That idea is terrifying, of just like the fact that he could be anywhere at once. He almost starts to actually be everywhere at once. And like, people start to act in that, like, just assuming that he's in the room because like,
right. The hijinks in this town that he was staying in, they start off as this silly thing of like, this whole town thinks there's an invisible guy. Isn't that dumb? And then once he like chokes out a cop in front of the other cops, the radio starts saying, everybody lock your doors. Yeah. There's an invisible crazy man out.
And I think this movie starts to do that the 2020 remake of this movie also does really well, is it's like, it'll just show you like an empty corner of a room, and just that is very threatening, because it's like, is he there? He might be, he might not be, but like, you have to start to assume that he's lurking in every corner, because like, that's always a possibility.
Yeah. And speaking more to the mechanics, like they're so after this all becomes apparent, there's basically like a nationwide manhunt for him. And the precautions that the cops are taking are like, okay, well, like, we've got to think about, like, what could it imply that there might be an invisible man near us? And it's like, how do we ensure that, like, what are some strategies we could use to capture him? And like, how do we ensure that he's not near us while we're talking about our plans? And so they go into this room and then run a net across the entire room to make sure that he's not in the room with them, which is a really great touch.
Yeah.
And they're like, part of their plans toward capturing him are like spraying him with paint or like knocking some dirt onto him so that it sits on his shoulders and you can see it floating. Very, very, very cool stuff.
Yeah, yeah. Another thing that I was sort of, I guess I sort of like almost like the intellectual implication of this movie is like, how much is Griffin's like insanity and his like cruelty coming from the fact that he's taken this weird chemical, and how much of it is just him like tripping out on the power of being invisible? Because he does like get worse over the course of the movie. Like, he starts out and he's just like a jerk to everyone. He's just rude and is like, he's clearly, you know, not well. But then by the end of the movie, he is like plotting to like take over the world and like commit mass murder and things like that. And it's like, I like how much of it is sort of like, some of this might just be him. The fact that he has been invisible for like weeks or months on end might have just like changed the way that like he sees the world almost.
Right.
It's like, just by being invisible has made him more evil.
I mean, yeah, there's a there's a contender for that for sure.
It's kind of the absolute power corrupts absolutely argument.
The way that this movie ends is I The way this movie ends is also like a quite a Frankenstein ending.
Yeah.
So after this manhunt, there's a farmer who's discovered some kind of strange, mysterious snoring sounds and leaves or like hay rustling in his barn.
Yeah.
After he's been on the run for a while.
During his manhunt, also he causes like a train derailment by like murdering the guy who works at the train yard and like turning the tracks so that the trains collide and explode.
Yeah, he is really just wanting to like cause as much havoc as possible.
Yeah.
To just show people how powerful he is. Maybe I'm skipping a little bit ahead to the ending, but he also just like brutally murders his friend after he realized that he called the police.
Right. He's like, if you betray me, like I will find you and murder you. Like you cannot escape. Like I'm gonna be behind you at some point, and you won't know.
Very ominous.
And so the guy, he's like, no one can leave me. Like I have to always like be in a room with powder on the floor. He's like taking all these precautions, and he thinks that he's gotten away. But he gets into a car and he's driving along, and then he hears a voice in the back seat. And yeah, Griffin like causes his car to go off a cliff and explode.
Yeah, I knew I told you shouldn't betray me.
Yeah.
Now you'll suffer the consequences. There's some good stuff also with him sitting in cars, like while he's like having his friend do his bidding, because like you can see so much stuff to just make him feel like he is present in the space. They do a lot of really good stuff with like moving props around with wires that you can't see, or like and making them move in ways that don't look like they're being pulled by a wire. Like they're being manipulated by a person. But like specifically with the cars, you see like the seat depressed down when he sits down, which is just another great touch. You're seeing that with the hay in the barn at the end. He's in this. It's snow, and the cops know that they can track him in the snow. So they're like, "This is the time. Like we've got to find him now." While it's snowing, they get a call from the farmer, and a la Frankenstein, they set fire to the barn to either like smoke him out or burn him alive. And they have a ring of cops all the way around the barn so that he can't slip past them, and they also and they can see the snow all around it. So as the barn burns, you see footprints in the snow,
and they even the cops say like no one walk over to it because then like we have to keep the snow clear.
Yeah, and yeah, they're able to shoot him. Yeah, like based on the footprints.
And once he gets shot, he falls in the snow, and you see like a body, like the snow depress, kind of like the seat.
The way they did that, John P. Fulton is the engineer who did all of the special effects in this movie, and he did the invisible effects, and he also did these, which the way it was done was they put fake snow on top of a platform, and then had cutouts, foot-shaped cutouts in the bottom of the platform that they pulled down to sink the snow down in foot shapes. Fantastic.
The best. Like such a simple thing, but like all the effects in this movie are like really kind of almost deceptively simple. But right, so after he gets shot, he gets brought to the hospital, and his old girlfriend Flora comes and visits him. And kind of Flora's like the one person that he kind of acts normal around. Like presumably how he used to be before he went crazy and invisible. I do kind of wish the movie had a little bit more of this like doomed romance subplot, because I think it's a cool idea that like he's going crazy, but like his connection to her is like kind of his one tether back to sanity.
She's definitely more developed than the equivalent character in Frankenstein. But
yeah. But so then when he dies, they sort of have a moment as he's dying where he's like kind of returned to his old self a little bit. And then he dies and he becomes visible again in the hospital bed. And we get our one shot of Claude Rains' face in the whole movie. Oh yeah. So Flora, the girlfriend is played by Gloria Stewart, who is most famous for playing Old Rose in Titanic, which I didn't know until after I saw this movie, and that's a fun bit of trivia. She does some really kind of classic 1930s capital A acting in this movie of like, oh, why?
She's also one of the co-founders of the Screen Actors Guild and of the Hollywood Anti-Nazi League.
Good job, Gloria.
Well done, Gloria.
You've done good.
Going back to the effects a little bit, like these just mind-blowing invisibility effects. The way it was done, it's still using double exposure or multiple exposures, as has been the trick for every movie since 1896. But they are just being used to an extreme level of expertness here.
Yeah.
The way that they were able to isolate the certain areas where he was supposed to be invisible was they would cover everything that was supposed to be invisible in black fabric. So the effect of that is that you're not getting any of that janky translucency that you get in other movies that haven't done it as well. There's no translucency in the composited quote-unquote things here. Like, it looks like it's fully in the scene. It's three-dimensional too. Like, you're seeing things being unwrapped, and like the you're seeing the cloths moving around. It's, oh god, it's amazing.
There's also there's the multiple exposure thing, which is like they had to do like I think 4 passes of. I think there's
the mirror scene in particular.
Well, I think the mirror scene they had to do like 8 passes because they'd have to do it once for the image in the mirror and then once for the like foreground image of him also taking the bandages off.
But then they needed to do the back plate of the mirror and the back plate of the foreground.
Crazy.
Yeah.
And then there's at least one shot of a close up of him taking the bandages off his face, and that was done with like a wireframe that they actually just wrapped bandages around. So that one has like even more kind of like 3D. You can see the back of the bandages in that one. Whereas in the multiple exposure stuff, they kind of when he's like has the bandages half off of his head, you can't see the back of them in the front.
Right.
This is an awful thing to explain in audio, but
the shots are very thoughtfully composed to make the effects pop as well as possible.
Yeah. And then there's also just fun stuff like a pair of pants chasing someone down the street.
Yeah, this movie's a blast. Yeah. This is great.
Super fun. Great lead performance. Great monster.
Did you say great monster?
I did say great monster. Great transition to one of the best monsters in any movie ever.
It's King Kong!
King Kong. We finally did King Kong.
Oh, we finally did it!
We don't have to change the album art for this episode at all.
Yes, the background of all of this is that if you have been seeing the lovely album episode art that we have done custom for every episode, it is based off of a photo that I took of a print of King Kong that I ran. I held the loop up to the kind of iconic scene of him in front on a skyscraper and took a photo with my phone and then cropped out the King Kong imagery and we put in different stuff. But now we don't have to.
Yeah.
Now
also,
it's just the original photo.
You did take like the best single frame of King Kong possible. It's like the most iconic thing.
I had to.
On the Empire State Building with an airplane. Yeah.
When I'm running movies that I know well on film and I'm trying to capture imagery, I know what images I want to capture.
Yeah.
I got one of those for Nightmare Before Christmas too, while he's like standing on the spiral hill, you know.
I had seen this movie a bunch of times. This is one of my favorite movies. I mean, I saw this movie when I was, I don't know how, I saw this movie as a young kid. I hadn't seen it in a while before I watched it this past week. But it's up there in terms of, I think I might have actually liked it less this time. Not necessarily liked it less, but there's more stuff stuck out of like, oh boy, this is an old movie.
Right.
But they're often kind of so over the top that it doesn't really hurt the movie as much as it maybe should for me.
Yeah.
People know what King Kong is, but it feels worth mentioning that this is like one of the most famous movies ever made, probably.
Yes. Yeah.
It's one of those.
this is this is a huge movie. It's very influential.
It's like
it was
so,
Beauty that killed the Beast.
Yeah, it's like so ingrained in culture though that like an entire building became associated with this movie and is like inseparable.
Yeah.
And even like the idea of like any primate of any notable size is like, oh, King Kong.
Donkey Kong.
Right. And
They're
we're
all
just
Kongs.
like, King Kong is like a nickname. Like, if someone's really big, like, King Kong over here. Like, King Kong is like is like a reference that everyone gets.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's
anytime someone is standing on top of a building and starts like swatting at something, it's like, oh, King Kong.
It's iconic.
Yeah.
It's iconic.
It's like, but it's so iconic. We talked about this with like Frankenstein and Dracula, but like King Kong might be even more of a like, also because those were books first. This is like this came from movies and is still kind of, I feel like it's in the Roku background, you know. It's like it's so associated with
if
like
you've made it into the Roku background,
that's when you know you've made it. But it's like if you're gonna throw like 5 like scenes from all of movies and you wanted to pick like the 5 most iconic ones, this would be one of them, I think.
Yes. I had seen this movie before as well. I've probably seen it a couple times back in the day. But
I'm pretty sure you watched this at my house at some point.
I'm sure I have, yes. But it'd probably been at least a decade since I've seen it.
Yeah.
And I was shocked at how brutal this movie is.
Oh, yeah. I forgot that this is a pre-code movie and that it is like, it goes places.
This movie, you know, it's not, I think that you feel empathy for Kong, but it's not quite like the Peter Jackson movie where like he's a bit more like it's a bit more sappy or whatever. Like he is a monster in this movie.
Yeah.
And like you see that he's suffering a little bit, but also he's just like chomping people and breaking their backs and snapping dinosaurs in half.
Yeah.
And like the violence in this is some of the most shocking violence in any movie we've seen so far.
Yeah. Yeah. A lot of it's against dinosaurs, but still.
Even with the people, like when he's like
people getting crushed and stomped and eaten and
there's such a, and you know, speaking of like the ways in Invisible Man where the special effects are integrated into the scene, it's done really, really well in this movie where like there's a part where he's coming up to like some guys who are crossing a big gulch on a log, and he starts shaking the log around to like make them fall down, which, you know, they have the stop motion composite like in the background kind of moving its hands, and then they have a giant log that they're just moving with the actual people on it, and then the people fall down to their deaths and like snap their backs on the ground. Yeah, it's brutal.
Yeah, this movie does such a good job of like the stop motion animation in this is the best that's been done up to this point, like hands down.
Yeah.
But it does such a good job of integrating it into live action, of like always having sort of like something in the foreground or something in the background that is being shot live action, of like with real actors or real sets to kind of give this illusion of.
Yeah. And they do they also sell that really well with some super tight close-ups of Kong's face that are made in much more detail. Yeah, it's still stop motion, I think, but it's
they did build a big Kong head too, though.
Okay, yeah.
There's a big Kong head, and they built a big Kong hand.
Right. Yeah.
I don't know how. There's a lot to talk about with this movie. I feel like, should we just like start at the beginning?
Sure.
Because right at the beginning, before the movie even starts, we see the RKO logo, which maybe look a little familiar to someone who watches the show.
I guess, I mean, you know, they didn't invent that imagery.
I think they did. I think that's RKO. That's like where the
they did it in
the radio tower. True, also true. Funny because we also use a radio tower on a spinning planet.
we're a very Kong setup.
Very Kong-centric show.
But this is the first RKO movie we've seen. Really big, famous production company.
Yeah, RKO, which was about to go bankrupt when they made this movie. They kind of put all their chips on it, and it saved their entire company.
I mean, it looks it. It looks so expensive.
I guess we'll get into it later. This movie like cannibalized whole other movies and like absorbed them into its production. But this movie opens with a completely made up old Arabian proverb, which goes, "And lo, the beast looked upon the face of beauty, and it stayed its hand from killing. And from that day, it was as one dead." Which is not a real proverb. It's made up by either Marion C. Cooper or Ernest Schoedsack, one of the two directors of this movie. Which we'll talk about them more too, probably.
This movie also starts with an overture, which is new.
Well, I think that's on the DVD. I don't know if that was a thing when it first came out or not.
Oh, really? Why wouldn't it be?
I don't know, but I'm curious how much of that was like, I don't know if that was something added back in when it was like released on DVD, because like earlier releases of it did not have the overture.
Oh, interesting.
But this movie, like any movie from this time period, got censored and like recut later on, so who knows?
King Kong originally did not have an overture.
Okay.
I
like how it does now, though.
Turner Classic Movies added it in 2005, apparently.
Yeah, so like right off the bat, we meet Carl Denham, who is a moving picture director and is a pretty direct analog for one of the directors, or I guess both directors of this movie, either Marion Cooper or Ernest Schoedsack, because both of those guys were like crazy adventurer filmmakers that like went off into faraway countries and like made sort of not really documentaries, sort of like Nanook style documentaries where a lot of it was scripted, but they were kind of trying to show people in the United States what like other cultures were like, and then kind of misrepresenting them by doing so. But they had a lot of stuff like wild animals and lions and things. So Carl Denham is very kind of clearly based on them. He is also pretty much every like toxic negative trait that like a filmmaker can have in one character. Like he's incredibly egotistical and reckless and willingly puts other people in danger and does not care. That was another thing I think rewatching this movie, because like in remakes of this, they usually treat Carl Denham or the Carl Denham analog as like more of a villain. And I was like, oh, Carl Denham in the original movie, he's okay. He's just trying to get his movie made. And it's like, no, he's like a crazy person in this movie. He's a very dangerous person to be around.
Extremely reckless. Yeah.
And so he's getting ready to go off to a mysterious place to make his new picture. And the producers are saying, you need a girl in this picture. You need a lady. And he says, isn't there any romance in the world without a flapper in it? The dialogue in this is also very like 1930s banter heavy, which is very fun.
There are a lot of people who just are not fans of women in this movie.
But when you say that, I feel like normally it's like, oh, okay, they like are kind of sexist or like treat women badly. No, they directly say to them, I don't like women.
Yeah, I mean, like, this is the first movie that Carl Denham has made that has a woman in it, apparently. So they're like, the studio's forcing me to make a picture with a romantic angle, so it'll sell more sell more tickets.
Yeah. The romantic angle. So Carl Denham goes out on the streets of New York that night to find a woman. And the first place he goes is
Name
to like...
woman.
The first place he goes is to like a woman's shelter, because it's the Depression and like people need food and housing. And he's like, these are all uggos. I gotta go somewhere else. He doesn't say that, but that's the vibe.
Yeah.
This section of the movie in New York City, I was surprised, I guess, at how like directly it is kind of commenting on the Great Depression. Like, this is a very like Depression era movie, and it's about kind of like money being tight and like things are rough out there on the streets, and it's like hard to get food. Because then he's walking by an apple stand, and Ann Darrow is stealing an apple that he pays for.
Played by Fay Wray.
Classic Fay Wray. Has been in lots of movies, but this is like the only one that she is ever remembered for, because obviously.
Something went wrong with Fay Ray in King Kong.
And so then Carl Denham has to convince her to just get on a ship that night to go somewhere that she doesn't know where.
And he won't tell her.
Yeah. And not an actress, but she's like, hey, you're pretty. You want to be in a movie?
She's like, sure, mister.
Yeah. Well, she takes a little bit of convincing. And he has to say, look, I'm on the level. No funny business.
I have that quote. She thinks that, like, you know, he's trying to, like, take her up to his apartment or whatever. Yeah. But yeah, no, I'm not interested in ladies.
Yeah.
I am an asexual, reckless adventurer.
Yeah. And so they got on the moving picture ship and head out to parts unknown. And on the ship, Andera runs into the first mate of the ship, Jack Driscoll, who one of the first things he said, well, the way they meet is Jack Driscoll accidentally slaps her in the face because he's throwing his arms up in the air. And then he says, women can't help being a bother. Made that way, I guess. It's like, Jesus Christ. Tell us how you really feel.
And this is the Smithers role in the King Kong Simpsons Treehouse of Horror segment.
One of the best Treehouses of Horror.
Where he says, I think women and semen don't mix.
But so, Jack Driscoll and Andera, kind of, they start to fall in love with each other, but the way it's dramatized in this movie is a little clunky. It's mostly just them saying that. Like, I don't actually think they have that much, like, romantic chemistry in this movie, but...
No. He does become a strapping adventurer when he stops being like a whiny first mate.
Yeah. Carl Denham picks up on the fact that he's getting sweet on Anne. And he goes, some big hard-boiled egg gets a good look at a pretty face and bang, he craps up and goes sappy. Incredible line of dialogue. It's around here that we find out that we are the destination for this expedition is a place called Skull Island. There is also a Skull Mountain on Skull Island.
It's like how there's a New York in New York.
Right, yeah. And then that mystery solved. It's a mysterious island no one's ever been to. It's not on any map. Carl Denham has the only map because he interviewed a drunk sailor in Singapore and got him to draw a map for him. And he's doing some screen tests with Anne on the deck of the ship with his old Bell and Howell hand-cranked camera. And we get a shot of the three crew guys, like, all on a ladder, like, stacked on top of each other. Which immediately stood out to me because that's where, in the Simpsons episode, there's the best joke in that whole thing where we're going to Ape Island to find a big ape. I wish we were going to Candy Apple Island. What they got there? Apes. Not so big, though.
It's a classic Simpsons joke.
It's so simple, but it's the funniest thing
one of their
in the
classic
world.
Misdirection style jokes.
Oh my god.
Yes, while they're on the ship, she starts kind of befriending one of the monkeys on the like a monkey that's just hanging out on the ship, which I think is a nice bit of foreshadowing.
Yeah.
She's just friendly to this like little charming monkey.
Andero, friend of apes.
Friend of apes, yes.
Also, this is when they're doing the screen test, we get our first Fay Ray scream.
Mm-hmm.
Fay Ray, famous for her screaming in this movie. Maybe the first scream queen, like, actor who's, like, known for being in horror movies and screaming.
I guess so, especially because you can only newly scream at all in movies.
That's what I thought about that, of, like, that can't exist without sync sound. So it's, like, that's kind of the genesis of that whole Hollywood trope also. They get to Skull Island through the fog. We get our first look at it with the big matte painting, which looks really cool. Even like some of the really simple VFX in this movie are really effective. Like the like animated birds in the foreground, like flying in front of the kind of view of the island.
They do so much in this movie with like depth. To like, really sell these scenes. And
like multi-pane stuff and like,
And like they're just silhouettes of birds that are in the foreground while they're landing on the beach. So it's just like black animated figures, but like it works. It's good. It like sells that there are creatures here, you know?
Yeah. Once we get to the island too is kind of when the score starts really kicking in. And this is like one of the first movies to have a like extended, like dramatic orchestral score. Like The Mummy had a little bit of score like here and there, but this has like most scenes in this movie that aren't just like straight dialogue scenes have music under them, like non-diegetic music.
Yeah.
And Max Steiner, who wrote the music, just does an like the score of this movie is still a great movie score.
Yeah, and it's like used in a very like classic, you know, movie score fashion.
Yeah.
Like there isn't anything that feels out of place with it.
Which
Certainly.
definitely like watching this movie growing up, it's like, King Kong, it's got music in it, like whatever. But watching it in context, it's like that really stands out. Really,
it's got music.
Yeah.
Yeah.
When something happens and there's like a big musical sting under it, it's like that. No one's done that very much. Like it's very kind of sparingly used in other movies, and this is not sparing with the score, and it's great.
And this movie like takes its time too. It's it feels like it's about halfway through the movie when you first meet King Kong, or maybe like a third of the way through the movie.
Yeah, I think it gets progressively longer in each remake. I think it's like there were a lot of reviews of the Peter Jackson King Kong. It's like an hour and a half until King Kong shows up. But I like that, the opening section. I like how much it takes its time and kind of builds tension of like, where are we going?
Yeah.
We don't know. Like Skull Island. What's the deal with Skull Island? I don't know. There's like a beast there or something. Don't worry about it. And then they go to shore and spy on the local indigenous islanders who live on Skull Island. This is definitely the part of the movie that holds up the worst.
Yeah. I mean, I was watching it and I was just like, racism.
Yeah. Yeah. It's definitely a big, like, for as much as I love like classic 1930s adventure shit, it's like, it's all pretty racist. This movie in particular, kind of. Yeah.
And it, you know, it's the kind of thing that it's like, it's not hateful, right? Like, it's not, it's just like, oh, the indigenous people, they wear bones in their hair and stuff like that, you know? Yeah. And like, it's very fearful. Quite ignorant.
Yeah, it's ignorant and it's very fearful. And it's definitely like playing up sort of like cultural differences as like, ooh, they're scary.
Yeah.
I will say this movie at least is able to cast people of color as opposed to just putting paint on them. Which would is definitely
would
in, like,
be worse.
The Lost World, which this movie is like nearly a remake of, did that, and it was bad. But so the indigenous people see Anne and that she's blonde, and they're like, "That's new," and they say, "Yeah, blondes are scarce around here."
And they say, "We'll trade 6 of our women for your one blonde one."
Yeah, which they think about, but then don't actually do.
And also, yikes.
They like don't immediately refuse, which is kind of funny. So yeah, they have this kind of tense standoff with the village during they got their big Kong ceremony, sort of sacrifice that's going on.
Yeah, they kind of like come in just at the right time because they're having their like yearly Kong sacrifice.
Right. But so they kind of leave under tense terms. Carl Denham is like, "I want to go back and I want to film more." And they're like, "No, like we can't, like calm down, Carl. We need to be safe." And back on the ship, Jack and Anne are talking and Jack says, "Say, I guess I love you." To which she responds, "Why, Jack, you hate women."
The chemistry.
I know. And he's like, "Well, that's true, but I guess you're okay." There is a bit of, I don't know if this is intentionally comedic, but there's like this like swelling romantic music under this conversation, and then it cuts away to Captain Englehorn, the captain of the ship, and like the music immediately cuts out when it cuts away to a different person, and then like it comes back when it cuts back to them, and I found that so funny.
I didn't notice that, but that could also just be like a factor of them being new to this kind of stuff.
But it was like, oh, it's great. But so then the Skull Islanders sneak aboard the ship and kidnap Anne. So they have to mount a rescue party, and they get all the boats and they get all their rifles and pack into the boats and go back to the
backpack
island.
full of bombs.
Yeah, they got their gas bombs that had been set up right from the beginning of the movie. Like, what are we bringing all these gas bombs to the island for? And Carl's like, oh, you'll see. We got our first big reveal of Kong coming out of the jungle.
Yeah,
which is
giant. I mean, y'all, anybody listening has seen this imagery before.
The big
but,
door.
Like,
yeah.
of the giant door that they keep locked to keep Kong on the other side, but they open it every once in a while to give him a sacrifice, a new bride of Kong.
Yeah.
And they decide to make it Fay Ray this time.
Yeah.
And so they tie her up. They tie her up and offer her up to Kong, and you finally see him. He finally reveals himself in another shot that is kind of like using the depth to and like multiple exposures to put her and the giant animation creature in the same frame.
Because it'd be one thing to have like a cool animation of Kong coming out of the jungle, right? But by having actual Anne be like in the foreground, it gives it such a sense of scale of like immediately you see how big Kong is.
Yeah.
Because there's a person in the shot.
We also haven't mentioned Willis O'Brien yet.
True.
Who is kind of just the lifeblood of this entire movie. He is the animator of Kong and the dinosaurs, and he did The Lost World previously and a couple other shorts.
Yeah,
and,
also like the Slumber Mountain, and was it Ghost of Slumber Mountain, right?
Yeah.
And a little backstory on how he got involved in this movie is that he was already making a like people go to an island full of dinosaurs movie called Creation in the early 30s for RKO, and had already like built all the dinosaurs for it and like shot footage from it and things. And then RKO was like, we're shutting you down because we're running out of money and we're going bankrupt. Marion Cooper and Ernest Schoedsack were like, hey, we have a crazy ape movie. You want to do the effects for that, but then also bring in all of your dinosaurs that you'd already made.
And he's like, I love dinosaurs.
Yeah, and so it's like this movie really this movie has like full scenes in it that were kind of planned for Creation. So that's what I mean when it's like this movie kind of like ate a whole nother movie and absorbed it into itself.
As Kong eats people.
Sure. Kong doesn't really eat people. He just kind of munches on them and spits them back out.
Yeah.
But yeah, once they kind of send the rescue mission into the jungle after Anne, we get the best part of the movie, which is like Anne and Kong in the jungle fighting dinosaurs, and then the crew of the Venture chasing after through the jungle, also fighting dinosaurs. And all of these scenes are the best, and I love them. And I want them to be playing in the background all the time.
This is where that scene where the Kong is shaking the log happens. Almost all of the adventurers die, except for our strapping hero. But they use a lot of that same kind of mixing two different scales together, popping between pulled back, fully stop motion scenes with stop motion human beings in them. And sometimes like Kong will be holding her, and then she's stop motion while he's holding her, and he puts her down on a tree to go fight a dinosaur, and then she becomes like the live action version composited in while he goes and fights a dinosaur, which is sick. It is when he fights a dinosaur, it rules.
And that's the thing where like this movie would be a cool movie were it not for Willis O'Brien. But I think Willis O'Brien is the one who makes it like a great movie, because he's able to infuse so much like character into the creatures in this movie. Like, and I mean, the fight with the T-Rex, right, is the coolest. But it's like that's all Willis O'Brien, kind of like doing choreography and stuff. Like, apparently Willis O'Brien was into boxing and wrestling earlier in life. And so that's where we get like a lot of the great like fight choreography in the scene where King Kong is like socking a T-Rex in the mouth and like throwing him over his shoulder and things like that. Where it's like, yeah, it's like there's so much personality in the animation too.
Yeah.
And so much of like why Kong works as like a character as opposed to just a monster is because like there's a bit right after he shakes all the people off the log and Jack stabs him in the finger as he's like reaching down to grab at him. And it's like Kong is like hurt by it. And he's like checking his finger and like he's like, that hurt.
Yeah, it's all very, very well planned out animation.
Or even like fighting the T-Rex, and after he breaks the T-Rex's jaws open, which is a crazy way to end a fight. And there's all like gore spilling out, and King Kong just starts like playing with the jaws
because he's a monkey,
right? But it's like just that extra little detail is such a like adds so much and like gives King Kong kind of like interiority.
It's the same thing in the spoilers death scene at the end.
Yeah.
Where like he is gradually getting more and more shot by the airplanes. And you see him go from like bravado to like vulnerability to like accepting his death.
Yeah.
And you can see that like on his face and in his movements.
Yeah. That's amazing. That all that stuff comes through as well as it does.
Yeah.
After the log scene is the kind of infamous lost spider pit scene, which is in the Peter Jackson one, but was deemed too gruesome, even by pre-code standards, and is like a famous like lost scene. Like they probably burned the film and it's gone forever, but there was originally a bit like in the Peter Jackson one where a bunch of spider creatures come out and eat the crew that fell off the log. There's also like a weird two-legged lizard thing that crawls up to get Jack after the log bit, which is that like weird creature design kind of comes back in the Skull Island movie, the Kong Skull Island, the sort of Monsterverse movie. But so then it's just Jack chasing after Anne through the jungle. We skipped over like the whole Stegosaurus fight, the whole bit where they go through the swamp and the Brontosaurus comes out and like eats a bunch of the crew.
That's a good part. Yeah.
So good.
A real vicious Brontosaurus.
Yeah, a Brontosaurus that is just eating people left and right, which I also love that kind of like every dinosaur in this movie is like the most monstrous version of a dinosaur possible. Like even the herbivorous dinosaurs are these like horrifying creatures that will just kill you immediately.
Stego's a nice guy. Stego's my favorite dinosaur.
Yeah, but like the Stegosaurus has like 8 spikes instead of 4. Like it's this like amped up version of a Stegosaurus, which is really cool. Jack eventually catches up to Anne, and they escape while Kong is fighting a pterodactyl up on top of Skull Mountain. And so they escape back, and then Kong chases them, and Carl's like, "Hang on, we can catch Kong, and then we'll all be rich." There's the bit where Kong is coming at the gates, and they're all holding. It's like both the crew of the Venture and the villagers are like bracing against the door. And Kong
they had their differences, but they both have an interest in stopping Kong from getting through.
Then Kong busts through because he wants his lady back, and like destroys the village and eats a bunch of people. Or stomps on them.
Crushes them into the mud.
Yeah.
And yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, it's pretty gruesome. Maybe not gruesome, but it's like more violent than even other pre-code movies.
I want to mention also so one thing while Jack is saving Anne from Kong and in Kong's lair is that like there's all this smoke coming up from the ground, and it's like one more thing that like integrates him into the scene. Live action lady, stop motion Kong, miniature cave, and then like superimposed smoke that like really just adds like a really, really great sense of scale to everything.
Yeah.
They're like it, including another way that smoke is used is in Invisible Man, where he smokes a pair of he smokes some cigarettes while invisible, and like the smoke just blows out of nowhere. Like it's a really good way of like solidifying a scene in like real physics.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure.
They throw some bombs at Kong, and they're like, "Let's take him to New York."
Yeah. Cut to New York, where he's on Broadway. Kong is now a Broadway show. As you do with a big giant animal. Put him on a Broadway stage.
This made me really mad that I never saw the Kong Broadway show a couple of years ago.
Yeah. I really wanted to see that and I never did. Even just I did walk by the marquee though once, and that was worth it. Because to see an actual marquee that says Kong in Times Square is very cool. And then we get some other sort of funny inflation bit, right, where there are people lining up to get into the theater, and someone goes, "These tickets cost me $20," which that's where I got the figure of $500. Like, that's $20 in 1933 is like $500 now.
I mean, I might pay $500 to see Kong.
See, it's like, hey, there's a Broadway show. It's about a big gorilla.
Yeah, people walk in thinking that it's a movie, and then the usher's like, "No, ma'am, it's a giant monkey."
Yeah, which I think is like, that's kind of what, I don't really know what audiences in this movie are supposed to think Kong is. They just see a sign, like, it's a bit hazy. Like,
they are
sell the
big
show?
Director people, and they'll follow Carl Denham wherever he goes.
Maybe
one kind of strange thing about this, potential movie that he was making is that it's a hand cranked camera, which like makes me wonder if this is supposed to be set in the silent film era.
I think it's probably early enough in the talkie era that, like, if you're going to a jungle to make a movie, you're not necessarily going to be shooting sync sound the whole time.
Right.
So I think the implication is that he's making movies like Cooper and Schoedsack made movies, which I think was oftentimes with hand-cranked cameras, like, in the jungle. But yeah, we got our big King Kong on Broadway thing. They're taking pictures of him. He gets mad. He breaks out and runs amok.
He doesn't like the flash photography, as all performers hate. I really don't know if I'm gonna like make somebody.
What?
I don't know if Cirque du Soleil is gonna fall to their deaths if they see a flash bulb, but I don't know why people act like it's that serious. But it is for Kong, certainly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
This is where Carl Denham also gets the idea. It's like, yeah, that's the angle. Beauty and the Beast.
Mm-hmm.
From kind of workshopping with the reporters how to do this.
But so Kong escapes, runs amok, busting trains, and he finds someone that he thinks might be Anne, but isn't. So he just drops her to her death, and then reaches into a building and pulls Anne out and climbs the Empire State Building, which got that great wide shot of like the entire Empire State Building, and you see the skyline and just the little kind of silhouette of Kong climbing up the side.
Yeah.
And they're like, oh no, how will we ever get him up there? And Jack Driscoll's like, airplanes, see, that'll get him. So they send a bunch of airplanes after him, and the great climax of the movie happens, where King Kong fights the airplanes on top of a building and then gets shot.
He's able to take one down, but eventually they plug him with enough lead that he slowly loses
and
energy and falls off the building.
Like, a thing that is, this scene is kind of the thing that like really puts this movie over the edge of being like a great movie, is that even though Kong is treated like a monster for most of the runtime of like, he's scary, sad. He's a big scary gorilla, like, watch out, he'll get you. There is that, like, over the course of this whole scene, you go from being like, not me, I was like Kong, but like, I feel like at the beginning of the scene, it's like, yeah, the airplanes are going to get him, to being like, oh no, this is so sad.
Yeah.
And that's just through like Kong's body language, as he's like getting weaker and he's bleeding out and he's like kind of starting to realize that he's dying. Like, you can see like a moment of realization where like he understands that he's about to die.
And he puts Anne down because he doesn't want to kill her along with him. Yeah.
It's like there's such a sense of, and the music matches that. Like, it's definitely intentional. This is supposed to be like a very tragic scene when he eventually falls.
Because, he's just an animal. He didn't do anything wrong, except kill lots of people.
Yeah.
But I mean, like, definitely I felt, especially when Kong was getting loose and like killing people in New York City and also killing a lot of the adventurers. I had the same feeling when the dinosaur got loose in The Lost World, where I'm just like, hell yeah.
Yeah, same. Absolutely, yeah. Anytime Kong is rampaging in this, it's great. But yeah, after he dies, we get the The classic last line. It wasn't the airplanes, it was beauty killed the beast.
Yeah, and then the movie like wraps up real quick.
Yeah, that's
like,
the last shot of the movie, and then it's like done. We're done.
It ends very abruptly, but yeah, it's a good picture. It's a good.
It
picture.
is. I think like the writing in it is like worse than I remembered, with all of the sort of like women are dumb.
Yeah. The dialogue writing is not fantastic, but I think that like just the whole adventure aspect and the effects and like the scale, it all works so well.
It's a great example of like both spectacle and like emotion accomplished through effects. Like there's all of just the fun of seeing dinosaurs eating people, or just like how big Kong is and things like that. But there's like all of the emotional stuff of Kong dying or interacting with Anne are like also, that's like full credit to Willis O'Brien for being able to do that as well as he does in this. I think I found out about this movie regarding the effects is that they, like, while promoting it, they released like fake explanations for how the effects were done. I guess to like keep it a secret. They were like, we can't tell anyone how we did this. And so there's like full diagrams and things of like forced perspective sets that they didn't build, and like people in ape costumes and things that they never did. They did that for Invisible Man also. They also like lied about how the effects were done.
Proprietary effects.
I guess like that's the only reason I can think of why they would just straight up lie about it. But I think that's actually really fun. Like I kind of want a movie to do that now. I'd be like, oh, do this, shoot this in the volume, where like you did this with mocap. It's like, no, it just make up an explanation. I think that would be great. I don't know. Any other big thoughts on Kong?
I think I've said everything that I've thought of. You're the big Kong guy.
I am a big Kong guy. It is. I mean, I think I showed this on the show before, right? I bought like a King Kong souvenir magazine. Yeah. The Life magazine King Kong edition.
For the podcast listeners, he is holding up the Life magazine King Kong edition. And
it's got some cool like behind the scenes pics in here. Maybe I'll try to find JPEGs of those and throw them up in the video. This movie was shot simultaneously or like around the same time as The Most Dangerous Game, which was released in 1932, which we didn't watch, but I have seen. Have you seen that movie?
No.
You know about The Most Dangerous Game though, right? The
humans.
Yeah. Exactly.
That's what I know.
Crazy guy hunts people on his island, but it's like it's the same island basically. Like it's all the a lot of the jungle sets and stuff. There's like clearly the same sets. Also, Fay Ray is in both movies, and this movie has a long kind of cultural tale. I guess they immediately, because this movie was so immediately successful, they made a sequel and released it in the same year, called Son of Kong, which I have seen and is very bad. Because it's about Carl Denham is so ashamed that he has killed Kong. Carl Denham gets a real sort of like redemption arc in the sequel, which is kind of fun. That's like the best thing about it. Otherwise, it's a very obvious cash grab. But so Carl Denham like goes back to Skull Island and finds Kong's smaller son, who's like a cuddlier version of King Kong. And there's like more kind of like cheaper dinosaur stuff happens. And then Skull Island, there's an earthquake and Skull Island sinks into the ocean at the end of that movie. But it's not good. Don't watch it unless you're a King Kong freak like me.
I kind of want to see it.
Yeah, I mean, whatever. This was remade in the 70s with Jeff Bridges and Jessica Lange, and I do not like that movie. I think it sucks and is bad. Have you seen the 70s King Kong?
I haven't seen that.
Okay. Also, not a fan. I do really like the Peter Jackson remake, though. Even though it's. I think the last time I watched that movie, I said it feels like every scene in this movie feels like a deleted scene. In that it's like, this is a crazy scene. I understand why they cut this out, but it's really something to see.
Well, you were watching were you watching the extended version?
I was watching, I don't remember which, I think I was watching the theatrical cut the last time I saw it, but I don't remember. But there's like King Kong versus Godzilla in the 70s, where like King Kong is a entirely different character almost, who's just a different big gorilla who lives on an island. And then there's the recent King Kong movies, Skull Island and Godzilla vs. Kong, which are very wacky, kind of dumb movies, but I like a lot.
I like the Monsterverse.
Kong Skull Island is, I think, the only King Kong movie that treats the like indigenous islanders with any respect whatsoever, and the only one that isn't like super fear-mongery around them. Like in all the other ones, they're like scary, like subhuman, almost just like, you know, othered, just like xenophobic people. And in the Skull Island movie, they're just like, yeah, they're just like an indigenous village. They don't like do sacrifices. They also live on the island. And it's like, okay, yeah, that's what actual like human cultures are like. So I guess shout out to that movie
probably 2005 King Kong was getting toward the end of when that was broadly culturally accepted.
Rewatching that movie, it's like, yikes, dude. Like, I think it almost tries to overcorrect by being like, they're so far from like a real human culture that they're just monsters.
I don't remember,
but it doesn't play great, I don't think. But so even today, there are still being movies being made about King Kong because he's just that great.
The ape lives on almost 100 years later.
And then, I mean, Marion C. Cooper later made Mighty Joe Young, which is another big ape movie. We got Dwayne Johnson in Rampage making his own big ape movie. Like, big apes became like a whole subgenre after this.
Right. Yeah, true. I mean, I guess, yeah, you're talking about Rampage, which was based on a video game, which probably was just directly inspired by King Kong.
Absolutely, yeah. Yeah, King Kong. Crazy movie. Crazy, like, even by, like, any standard, like, this is a pretty crazy movie, just in terms of, like, what happens in it.
Mm-hmm.
But I think it is really, there's, like, the thematic ideas of it, I think, are really strong and really hold up, of like civilization and like the wilderness and kind of, nature versus
don't
man.
Mess with nature. Yeah.
Like King Kong cannot live in New York City. It wouldn't work, you see.
The moral of the story is King Kong can't live in New York City.
King Kong. What a picture.
What a picture indeed. Got anything else on King Kong?
I'm Konged out. I mean, I probably could keep talking about King Kong, but I don't know if it would be much of a conversation so much as just me saying King Kong things.
It'd be a conversation.
All
right, well, that'll do it for this week.
Should that be the name of the episode?
A conversation. Yeah, I like that.
I like the other one they came up with more still, but...
If you like our show, you can follow us on socials and all that kind of stuff, and subscribe to our YouTube channel, and that'll do it. A lot of good movies in 1933. Wait a second, Glenn, what's your favorite?
I mean, I guess it kind of by default has to be King Kong, almost, but I don't know, like. I also really liked Design for Living.
Yeah.
And I really liked Invisible Man. And I really liked Mabuse and Gold Diggers also. Like, but
Design for Living's got to be it for me.
Yeah. I think I have to say King Kong, just like by obligation almost, because otherwise like my entire identity would shift.
You could just become a Design for Living guy instead of a Kong guy.
Maybe. Yeah. I gotta buy the Life magazine Design for Living edition.
So that'll do it on this episode. We're doing 1934 next. A lot of good movies looking like they're coming up there.
Some I'm really looking forward to from that year for sure.
Well, Glenn, I'll see you next year.
See you next year.
We're in the money. We're in the money.